My parents sold my grandfather's antique Steinway piano, the one thing he explicitly promised to me, and used the $195,000 to buy my unemployed sister a brand new Mercedes G-Wagon. They thought because Grandpa was in hospice taking his last breaths, that nobody would notice the theft. They thought I was just a clueless art store clerk who would roll over and accept it. But when I whispered the truth to Grandpa from his hospital bed, he did not cry. He did not yell. He simply reached for his old flip phone, dialed a number, and said 5 words that would destroy their entire lives. It is time to release the hounds. Before I tell you how a single phone call turned their luxury lifestyle into a federal crime scene, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to watch karma come for the people who betrayed you. My name is Dominique, and at 32 years old I have mastered the art of silence. My family in Chicago thinks I spend my days dusting picture frames in a dusty New York basement. They have no idea that I am actually the senior acquisition director for one of the most prestigious auction houses in Manhattan, or that I can spot a forgery from across the room. But the biggest forgery I ever had to identify was my own mother's love. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I unlocked the heavy oak door of my grandfather's house in Oak Park. I had flown in to say my final goodbyes, my chest tight with the grief of losing the only man who had ever truly seen me. The house usually smelled of old sheet music and lemon polish, a scent that instantly calmed my nerves. But today the air felt different. It felt empty. I walked into the formal living room, my eyes instinctively drifting to the corner by the bay window. My breath hitched in my throat. The space was vacant. The 1928 Steinway Model B, a masterpiece of mahogany and ivory that had been the beating heart of this family for 3 generations, was gone. All that remained were 4 deep indentations in the plush carpet where its legs had stood for 50 years, looking like fresh wounds in the floor. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I spun around as footsteps clicked against the hardwood of the hallway. My mother, Patricia, glided into the room. She was wearing her oversized Sunday church hat, the one with the silk flowers that cost more than my first car, and checking her reflection in her compact mirror. She did not even look at me. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice trembling not with sadness, but with a rising fury I struggled to suppress. "Where is the piano, Mother?" Patricia snapped her compact shut and sighed as if my presence was a minor inconvenience to her schedule. "Oh, Dominique, you are finally here. Don't start with the drama." I sold it. It was taking up too much space, and frankly, it was gathering dust. Nobody has played that thing in years. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Nobody played it because Grandpa got sick," I said, stepping closer to her. "And he left that piano to me. He told you that. He told everyone that. You had no right to touch it." My mother waved a manicured hand dismissively. "He is in hospice, Dominique. He does not know what day it is, let alone who owns a piece of old furniture. Besides, I got a very good price for it. $195,000. It was a blessing, really. The Lord provides when the family is in need." "In need," I repeated, looking around the house filled with expensive vases and Persian rugs. "You live in a $4 million estate. How are you in need? And more importantly, how did you sell it? You only have medical power of attorney, Mother. That gives you the right to talk to doctors, not to liquidate his assets." She finally looked at me, then her eyes narrowing with that familiar mix of pity and disdain. I told the buyer I had full authority. "Who is going to check Dominique? You. You can barely afford your rent in New York. I did what was best for this family. We had expenses to cover, important expenses." I opened my mouth to scream to tell her that she had just committed fraud, but a deep guttural rumble from the driveway cut me off. It was the sound of a high-performance engine, aggressive and loud, shaking the window panes. Patricia's face lit up, a complete transformation from the cold mask she wore a second ago. "Oh, perfect timing. That must be the expenses right now. Come on, fix your face. Your sister is here, and I want you to be happy for her." I followed her out to the front porch, my legs feeling heavy, like I was wading through concrete. Pulling into the circular driveway was a monstrosity of a vehicle. A brand new jet-black Mercedes AMG G63, the G-Wagon. It sat there idling like a tank, the chrome accents gleaming under the Chicago sun. It was aggressive, ostentatious, and completely unnecessary. The driver's door opened and out stepped Kyle, my sister's husband. He was wearing a suit that was too tight and sunglasses that were too big. Kyle was 28, had never held a job for more than 6 months, and called himself an entrepreneur because he once bought $50 worth of cryptocurrency. He looked at the massive vehicle with a hunger that made my stomach turn. Then the passenger door swung open and my sister Bianca hopped out. She was holding her phone up, clearly live streaming to her Instagram followers. "Hey guys, look at what just arrived," she squealed at the screen, doing a spin. "Hard work pays off. New whip alert." She spotted me on the porch and lowered the phone, her smile fading slightly. "Oh, hey, Dominique. I didn't know you were coming today." I stared at the car, then at my mother, then back at the car. The math was sickeningly simple. $195,000 for the piano. $190,000 for the car. They had traded a century of legacy for a depreciating asset that got 12 miles to the gallon. "You bought a G-Wagon," I said, my voice flat. "With Grandpa's money." Kyle walked around the front of the car, slapping the hood affectionately. "Not Grandpa's money, Dom. Family money. And don't be jealous. It looks bad on you. Besides, Bianca needs this for her brand. She is an influencer. She can't be seen driving around in that old Lexus anymore. Image is everything." He walked up the steps, stopping right in front of me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single grimy key attached to a faded plastic fob. It was the key to his old Honda Civic, a car that hadn't been washed since the Obama administration. "Here," he said, tossing the key at me. I didn't catch it. It hit my chest and clattered onto the porch floor. "You can take the Honda to the hospital to see the old man. I would let you drive the G-Wagon, but it is fresh off the lot, and frankly, you look like you have been flying coach all day. I don't want you getting airport grime on the leather." I looked down at the dirty key on the ground. The disrespect was so absolute, so casual, that it almost felt surreal. Bianca chimed in, adjusting her hair in the reflection of the car window. "Honestly, Dominique, you should be thanking us. That piano was just a pile of old wood. At least this car has a V8 engine. It is practical. Grandpa would want us to be safe on the road." Safe, I thought. You just sold the only thing he loved to buy a tank for a man who can't even pay his own cell phone bill. I bent down and picked up the Honda key. The metal was cold against my skin. I did not scream. I did not fight. I knew that anything I said right now would be wasted breath. They did not respect me. They did not fear me. To them, I was just Dominique, the poor sister, the one who polished other people's treasures while they spent the family fortune. "I will see you at the reading of the will," I said quietly. Patricia laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, honey, don't worry about the will. We have everything under control. Just go say goodbye to your grandfather and fill up the Honda before you bring it back." Kyle hates when the tank is low. I walked past the gleaming beast of a car, past my preening sister and my arrogant brother-in-law, and climbed into the dirty Honda Civic. The interior smelled of stale fast food and cheap cologne. As I turned the ignition and the engine sputtered to life, I looked in the rearview mirror. They were all standing around the G-Wagon posing for a photo. My mother was beaming. They looked like winners. They looked untouchable. I pulled out of the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I drove toward the hospice center on the other side of town. The tears finally came, then hot and angry, blurring my vision. But beneath the sadness, something else was waking up, a cold, hard resolve that I had not felt in years. They thought the piano was just wood and strings. They thought I was just a doormat. They had no idea that the piano key was literally the key to everything. And they had no idea that the man lying in that hospice bed was not just a helpless old grandfather. He was Cyrus Vance, the man who built half of Chicago from the ground up. and he had taught me everything he knew about closing a deal. I pulled into the hospice parking lot, wiped my face, and took a deep breath. It was time to tell Grandpa what they had done. It was time to make the call. The drive to the hospice center in Kyle's dirty Honda Civic felt like a funeral procession for my own dignity. The car rattled every time I hit a pothole on the expressway, and the smell of stale cigarette smoke clung to the fabric of the seat, a stark and disgusting reminder of the disrespect I had just endured. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the peeling rubber of the steering wheel. It was not just the anger simmering in my veins. It was the crushing weight of guilt. I was about to walk into the room of the man who raised me, the man who taught me how to read sheet music before I could read words, and tell him that I had failed to protect his most sacred legacy. St. Mary's Hospice was a quiet place wrapped in the suffocating scent of antiseptic and lilies. It was a terrifying contrast to the loud, flashy arrogance of the driveway I had just left. Here money did not matter. Here only time mattered, and my grandfather Cyrus Vance was running out of it. I walked down the long beige hallway, my heels clicking softly against the linoleum, counting the room numbers. 302, 303, 304. I paused at the heavy oak door, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I wiped a stray tear from my cheek with the back of my hand. I could not let him see me cry. He always told me that tears were for grieving, and he wasn't dead yet. I pushed the door open gently. The room was dimly lit, the blinds drawn to keep out the harsh afternoon sun. The only sound came from the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the soft mechanical hum of the oxygen machine. Grandpa Cyrus looked so small in the hospital bed. The man who had once commanded boardrooms in downtown Chicago and terrified contractors with a single raise of his eyebrow was now frail, his skin like parchment paper stretched over brittle bones. But when I stepped closer, his eyes opened. They were cloudy, but the sharp intelligence behind them was still there. He turned his head slowly, and a weak smile touched his lips. "There she is," he whispered, his voice raspy and dry like dead leaves scraping together. "My little virtuoso." "Hi, Grandpa," I said, pulling the hard plastic chair close to his bedside and taking his cold hand in mine. It felt fragile, like holding a dried flower that might crumble if I squeezed too hard. "You are late," he teased, squeezing my fingers with surprising strength for a man in his condition. "I assume your mother kept you." She always did like the sound of her own voice more than she liked listening to anyone else. I forced a laugh, but it came out as a choked sob. I tried to look away, focusing on the IV drip, but his gaze was too piercing. He studied my face, scanning me like he used to scan blueprints for his buildings, looking for structural weaknesses. "What is wrong, Dominique?" he asked, the playfulness vanishing from his tone instantly. "You have your serious face on. The one you used to make when you could not master a difficult chord progression." I looked down at our joined hands. I wanted to lie. God, I wanted to lie so badly. I wanted to tell him that the piano was safe, that I had covered it with a silk sheet to protect it from the dust, that it was waiting for me to play it when he came home. But I had never lied to him. He was the only person in the world I could be honest with. "Grandpa," I started, my voice trembling. "I am so sorry. I tried to stop them. I really did. But they used the medical power of attorney. They tricked the buyers." He stayed silent, waiting. His chest rose and fell with a wheeze. "They sold the Steinway." I whispered the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "Mom and Kyle and Bianca. They sold it this morning while you were sleeping. For $195,000. They bought a car, Grandpa. They bought a Mercedes G-Wagon for Bianca, because she said she needed it for her image." I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the reaction. I expected the heart monitor to speed up into a panic. I expected him to gasp, to get angry, to yell, or worse, to cry. I had just told a dying man that his most prized possession, the instrument that held the soul of our family history, had been traded for a depreciating piece of metal. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the steady beep, beep, beep of the monitor. And then I heard it, a sound I never expected, a dry, low sound that rumbled in his chest. I opened my eyes. Grandpa Cyrus was shaking, not with rage but with laughter. He was laughing so hard that he started to cough, his chest heaving under the thin hospital blanket. "Grandpa," I panicked, standing up to check his oxygen tube. "Are you okay? Please calm down. Do not hurt yourself." He waved me off, his eyes crinkling with amusement. He took a deep, rattling breath and looked at me, a mischievous glint shining in his eyes that made him look 20 years younger. "They sold it for $195,000. He wheezed, a smile spreading across his face. "Those absolute fools. Those greedy, short-sighted, ignorant fools." I stared at him, completely confused. "Grandpa, they sold your piano. The one you played for Grandma on your wedding day. The one you promised to me? Why are you laughing?" He gestured for me to sit back down and lean closer. "Dominique, listened to me closely. They sold the piano. They sold the mahogany wood, the ivory keys, and the steel strings. They sold the vessel. But they did not sell the treasure." My brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "Do you remember when I had the piano restored in 1985? Everyone thought I was just fixing the soundboard. But I did something else. I had the craftsman hollow out the 3 legs of the piano." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "Hollowed out. Why?" "Because, my dear, I knew this day would come," he said, his voice gaining strength with every word. "I knew your mother and that vulture she calls a son-in-law would come for my money the second my heart stopped beating. I knew they would fight over the bank accounts and the real estate like dogs over a bone. So I took the real fortune out of the bank 40 years ago." He squeezed my hand hard. "Inside the front left leg of that Steinway, rolled up in a waterproof cylinder, are 50 original bearer bonds issued by the United States Treasury in 1950. And inside the right leg are diamonds I purchased during my time in South Africa. Uncut, untraceable, and completely off the books." My jaw dropped. "Grandpa, how much?" He smirked. "The last time I calculated the interest and the market value, the contents of those piano legs were worth approximately $3.2 million. And the best part is, because they are bearer bonds, whoever holds the physical paper owns the money. There is no digital trail. There is no record for your mother to find." He let out another satisfied chuckle. "They sold a $3 million vault for the price of a used car." I sat back in the plastic chair, stunned. The weight of the revelation crashed over me. My family had been so desperate to look rich, so desperate to flash a Mercedes logo around town, that they had literally given away a fortune. Grandpa looked at the bedside table. "Open the drawer, Dominique." I reached over and slid the metal drawer open. Inside, sitting next to his reading glasses and a Bible, was an old brick-like Nokia phone. It was the phone he used for his private business dealings, the one he never let anyone touch. "Turn it on," he commanded. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up with a pixelated green glow. The battery was still full. "Find the contact named Sterling," he said. "Not the office number. The private line." I scrolled through the short list of contacts until I found the name. Mr. Sterling was Grandpa's ruthless attorney, a man who could scare the devil out of hell. A man who charged $600 an hour just to answer an email. "Call him Grandpa," said his voice, turning cold and sharp, the voice of the business tycoon returning. "Put it on speaker." I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. Cyrus, a deep, gravelly voice, answered immediately. "I did not expect to hear from you today. Is it time?" Grandpa leaned toward the phone, his eyes no longer smiling. They were cold steel. "Sterling, the vultures have picked the bones," Grandpa said clearly. "They sold the Steinway this morning, unauthorized. They used the medical power of attorney to bypass the estate protocol." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of a pen scratching aggressively on paper. "I see," Sterling said. "That is unfortunate for them. Extremely unfortunate. Shall we proceed with the contingency plan?" "Yes," Grandpa said. "Initiate protocol. Garden of Eden." And Sterling, contact the IRS tip line immediately. My daughter just came into a large sum of unreported cash. I believe Uncle Sam would like to know about her sudden windfall before she spends it all on gas for a truck she cannot afford. "Understood," Sterling replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "And the piano." Grandpa looked at me. His eyes softened, full of pride and trust. "My granddaughter is here. She is the only one with the brain to understand value over price. She is going to retrieve it." Dominique Sterling's voice addressed me directly through the speaker. "Do not say a word to your family. Let them celebrate. Let them post their pictures. You need to find that piano before it leaves the country. I will handle the legal paperwork to crush them, but you must secure the physical asset. Can you do that?" I looked at my grandfather. He gave me a nod. It was a passing of the torch. He was handing me the sword and telling me to finish the war he had prepared for decades ago. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. "I can do it," good Sterling said. "Then happy hunting, Dominique." The line went dead. Grandpa sank back into his pillows, looking exhausted but triumphant. He closed his eyes and let out a long breath. "Go get my piano, Dominique," he whispered. "And when you get it back, play Moonlight Sonata for me. Play it so loud that it shakes the foundation of that house." I stood up, pocketed the Nokia phone, and kissed his forehead. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. As I walked out of that hospice room, I was no longer the victim. I was the hunter. And my family had no idea that they were the prey. The interior of the Honda Civic felt like a confessional booth as I stared at the Nokia phone in my lap. The screen was glowing with the number my grandfather had given me. Outside the car window, the gray Chicago sky was beginning to darken, mirroring the storm that was about to break over my family. I took a deep breath, the kind of breath you take before diving into deep water, and pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. It was deep baritone and calm, the kind of voice that billed $400 just for a greeting. "This is Sterling." "Mr. Sterling, this is Dominique Cyrus Vance's granddaughter. I am calling from the hospice parking lot." There was a pause, a shifting of papers on the other end. "Ah, Dominique, your grandfather spoke highly of you. I assume you are calling because the piano has left the building." "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "They sold it this morning, $195,000. Mom used the medical power of attorney to authorize the sale." Sterling let out a low hum, a sound that was less surprised and more disappointed. "Amateur mistake. Your mother always did think she was the smartest person in the room. She forgets that the room was built by your grandfather." "Is Cyrus with you?" "No," I said. "But he gave me instructions. He said to tell you to initiate Protocol Garden of Eden." I heard the squeak of a leather chair as Sterling leaned forward. Protocol Garden of Eden. It sounded biblical. It sounded like a purge. "Very well," Sterling said, his tone shifting from polite to lethal. "Here is what is going to happen in the next hour. I am going to file a priority report with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. You see, Dominique, when your mother sold that piano, she accepted a check. She likely deposited it immediately to buy that car. She believes that money is an inheritance, a tax-free gift from a dying man." He paused for effect. "But it is not inheritance," Sterling continued. "Because Cyrus is not dead, and because he did not authorize the sale, that money is not a gift. It is theft. But to the IRS, we are going to classify it as unreported earned income. We are going to flag it as a business transaction. And since Patricia has not paid taxes on a dime of income in 20 years, an unexplained deposit of nearly $200,000 is going to trigger a forensic audit that will go back a decade." I felt a chill run down my spine. An IRS audit was not just a headache. For people like my mother and Kyle, who lived on credit and lies, an audit was a death sentence. When will they know? I asked. Not yet, Sterling said. And this is the most important part, Dominique. You cannot say a word. The IRS moves like a glacier, slow and crushing. It will take a few days for the system to flag the account. In that time, your family must believe they are in the clear. Why, I asked, watching a nurse walk past my car. Why not warn them? Maybe they could return the money. Sterling laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Because arrogance is an accelerant, Dominique. Your grandfather wants them to feel rich. He wants them to spend. The more they spend, the deeper the hole they dig. If they buy champagne, let them. If they renovate the house, encourage them. Every dollar they spend is another piece of evidence that they are squandering stolen assets. Let them hang themselves with their own credit cards. I understood. It was cruel, it was ruthless, and it was exactly what they deserved. Understood, I said. I will play my part. Good. I will begin the paperwork. And Dominique, find that piano. The audit will destroy them financially, but the piano is the only way to secure your future. Do not let it leave the state. I hung up the phone. The conversation had lasted less than 3 minutes, but it had shifted the axis of my world. I wasn't just the rejected daughter anymore. I was the mole. I was the spy in the house of cards. I put the car in gear and drove back toward the estate. The drive felt different this time. The anger that had been burning in my chest was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating calm. I pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Music was thumping from the open windows, a heavy bass line that rattled the glass. The new Mercedes G-Wagon was parked front and center, positioned so that anyone walking up the path had to admire it. It was already surrounded by empty champagne bottles. I parked the dirty Honda on the street, not wanting to ruin their aesthetic, and walked up the driveway. Inside, the house was chaotic. My mother had invited half the neighborhood. It was supposed to be a casual dinner, but it looked more like a coronation. People were drinking wine, laughing, and complimenting Bianca on her success. Bianca was in the center of the living room holding a glass of Prosecco, recounting a completely fabricated story about how her hard work in social media marketing had finally paid off. I stood in the entryway, invisible. I watched them celebrate a victory that was actually a trap. It was like watching people dance on a trapdoor. Suddenly, my mother spotted me. She marched over, her face flushed with wine and triumph. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in distaste. Look who finally decided to show up, she snapped, her voice cutting through the music. Did you have a nice cry with your grandfather? Did you tell him how mean we are? I looked at her. I looked at the diamond earrings she was wearing, earrings I knew she had bought on a credit card that was maxed out. I forced my facial muscles to relax. I lowered my shoulders. I adopted the posture of the defeated. No, Mom, I said softly. He was sleeping. I didn't want to wake him. Good, she said, losing interest instantly. At least you have some sense. Look, the caterers are running late, and Kyle invited his investment partners. We need appetizers circulating now. She reached onto a nearby table and grabbed a white-stained apron. She threw it at me. It hit me in the chest and slid down to catch in my arms. Put this on, she ordered. Go to the kitchen. There are frozen quiches in the freezer. Heat them up and put them on the silver platters. And try to look less like a funeral attendant. This is a celebration. We are finally getting the respect we deserve. I looked down at the apron. In my apartment in New York, I had a closet full of silk and cashmere. I had a staff of 3 who managed my schedule. I had shaken hands with billionaires and negotiated deals that would make my mother's head spin. And here I was, being told to heat up frozen quiches. For a second, the old rage flared up. I wanted to throw the apron in her face. I wanted to tell her that the IRS was coming. I wanted to scream that she was broke, and I was the only thing standing between her and prison. But then I remembered Sterling's voice. Arrogance is an accelerant. I clenched the apron in my fist. I looked at my mother, who was already turning away to laugh at a joke Kyle was telling. "Okay, Mom," I said obediently. "I will get right on it." I walked into the kitchen, the sounds of their laughter following me. I tied the apron strings behind my back. I opened the freezer. As I arranged the frozen appetizers on the baking sheet, I allowed myself a small cold smile. Eat up, I thought. Enjoy the food. Enjoy the wine. Enjoy the car. Because this is the last meal of the condemned, and tomorrow the bill comes due. The living room of my grandfather's estate had been transformed into a stage for the greatest performance of my mother's life. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, roast beef, and hypocrisy. My mother had invited the church mothers, a group of women who wore hats large enough to block out the sun, and who judged everyone else's sins while sipping on bottomless glasses of Chardonnay. They sat on the velvet sofas like a panel of judges, nodding solemnly as my mother recounted a fictional version of the last few days. She told them how hard she had prayed for a financial miracle, and how the Lord had blessed the family with the means to buy a safer vehicle for Bianca. She conveniently left out the part about selling a dying man's heirloom to a stranger. I moved through the crowd wearing the stained white apron, holding a silver tray of warm quiches. To the guests, I was invisible. I was just the help. I was the disappointment daughter who lived in a shoebox in New York and probably sold watercolor paintings on the sidewalk for food money. I offered a napkin to Mrs. Gable, the head of the choir. She took it without looking at me, her eyes fixed on Kyle, who was holding court near the fireplace. Kyle was in his element. He held a crystal tumbler of my grandfather's 25-year-old scotch, swirling the amber liquid like he was in a movie. He was surrounded by a group of men who looked just like him, men in shiny suits with restless eyes. I knew them. They were his business partners, a generous term for a group of guys who bounced from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. I drifted closer, refilling empty glasses, my ears pricked. Kyle was loud, his voice booming with unearned confidence. "You have to leverage your assets, gentlemen," Kyle was saying, gesturing broadly with his free hand. "That is the secret to wealth. Most people sit on equity. Smart men liquidate. Take the G-Wagon outside. People see a car. I see a mobile office. I see a branding tool. It tells the world that we have arrived, and this is just the beginning. Once the estate settles, we are looking at major property development." One of the men asked about the capital gains tax. Kyle waved him off with a laugh that sounded a little too high-pitched. "Tax is for people who don't know how to play the game," Kyle bragged. "We have structures in place. Family trusts. It is all about moving money before the government sees it." I tightened my grip on the silver tray. If only he knew that the government was not only looking, but they were already sharpening their knives. He was bragging about tax evasion in a room full of witnesses, and I was the only one who knew the execution date was set. I turned to head back to the kitchen, but a hand grabbed my elbow. It was Bianca. She was glowing, her skin perfect, her dress a shimmering silver that probably cost more than my first year of college tuition. She smelled of vanilla and arrogance. "Oh, Dominique," she said loudly, making sure the people around us could hear. "Be a dear and bring another bottle of champagne, the good stuff from the cellar, not the cheap stuff you probably drink in New York." A few of her friends giggled. Bianca smiled at them, playing to her audience. "You guys know Dominique, right?" she continued, tilting her head at me. "She is the artistic one in the family. She works at some shop in New York. Do you still paint those little pictures of cats, Dom? Or have you moved on to fruit bowls?" I looked at my sister. I thought about my office overlooking Central Park. I thought about the Rembrandt I had authenticated last week, a discovery that made headlines in the art world. I thought about the 7-figure commission check sitting in my safe. "I work in acquisitions, Bianca," I said simply. "Acquisitions," she mocked, rolling her eyes. "That is a fancy word for shopping at thrift stores. Look, seriously, if you need money, just ask. Mom said we can probably set you up with a monthly allowance once we sell this house. We are going to tear it down, you know. Build something modern. Maybe a duplex. You could live in the basement unit if you behave." The disrespect was so casual, so ingrained, that it did not even sting anymore. It just confirmed everything I needed to do. "I will get the champagne," I said, pulling my arm free. I walked away, my heart pounding a cold rhythm against my ribs. I needed to get out of there. I needed air. I pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, but stopped dead when I heard hushed voices coming from the back patio door, which was cracked open slightly. It was Kyle, and the tone of his voice had changed completely. The bravado was gone. He sounded desperate. I crept closer to the door, peering through the crack. Kyle was standing in the shadows with a man I did not recognize. This man was not wearing a suit. He was wearing a leather jacket, and he looked like he broke kneecaps for a living. "I don't want to hear excuses, Kyle." The man said, his voice low and dangerous. "You said you would have the 50 grand by Friday. It is Friday night. I see a new Mercedes in the driveway. I see expensive scotch. But I don't see my money." Kyle was sweating. I could see the sheen on his forehead even in the dim light. "Look, Marco, listen to me. The car is an investment. It is leased in my wife's name, okay? I didn't pay cash, but the money is coming. The old man is dying. He is in hospice right now, any day now." The man, Marco, stepped closer, invading Kyle's personal space. "You are betting on a funeral. That is cold even for me." "It is a sure thing," Kyle pleaded, his hands shaking. "He has millions in property. We are the sole heirs. My wife and mother-in-law, they sign whatever I put in front of them. Once he kicks the bucket, we sell this place. I will pay you double, 100 grand. Just give me 2 more weeks." Marco stared at him for a long moment, then tapped Kyle on the cheek. A light tap, but it carried a heavy threat. 2 weeks, Kyle. If the old man is not dead in 2 weeks, you are going to wish you were. I stepped back from the door, my breath caught in my throat. This was the final piece of the puzzle. Kyle wasn't just greedy, he was drowning. He was $50,000 in debt to a loan shark, and he was planning to liquidate my grandfather's legacy to save his own skin. He was going to sell the house, the land, everything just to cover his bad bets. Suddenly a vibration buzzed against my hip. I reached into the pocket of my apron and pulled out my phone. It was a text message from an unknown number. It had to be the contact Mr. Sterling had given me. I unlocked the screen. The message was short, brutal, and terrifying. "Asset located. Port Newark, New Jersey. Container 4. Bravo. Cargo ship, the Siren, departs for Dubai in 6 hours. If it leaves the dock, it is gone forever." I stared at the screen. Dubai. If the piano went to Dubai, it would disappear into a private collection protected by international laws and impenetrable wealth. I would never get the bonds. I would never get the diamonds. And my grandfather's fortune would be lost to the sands of the Middle East, while my family was slaughtered by the IRS and loan sharks here in Chicago. 6 hours. I looked back at the party. My mother was laughing. Bianca was dancing. Kyle was wiping sweat from his brow and pouring another drink. They were celebrating their victory, unaware that the ground was crumbling beneath them. I untied the apron and let it drop to the kitchen floor. I did not care about the quiches. I did not care about the champagne. I walked out the side door into the cool night air. I climbed into the Honda Civic. I had a plane to catch. The hunt was on. The call came at 3:18 in the morning. It was a nurse from St. Mary's Hospice, her voice soft and practiced in the art of delivering bad news. She told me that Cyrus Vance had passed away peacefully in his sleep. His heart had simply stopped, tired of beating for a world that no longer appreciated men like him. I did not scream, I did not cry, scream. I simply thanked her, hung up the phone, and stared at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom. The grief was a heavy stone weight in my chest, but alongside the sorrow sat a cold, sharp panic. Grandpa was gone. The protector of the estate was gone. The only thing standing between my family's greed and total destruction was me, and the clock had just started ticking. I walked downstairs to break the news. My mother, Patricia, was asleep on the sofa, still wearing her cocktail dress from the party, an empty wine bottle on the floor beside her. when I shook her awake and told her the performance began immediately. She threw her hands up, wailing loud enough to wake the neighbors, crying about how she was now an orphan. Within 10 minutes, she was on Facebook typing out a long, tragic post about her loss, asking for prayers and implicitly attention. Kyle and Bianca came down shortly after. Kyle's first question wasn't about the funeral arrangements or how Grandpa died. It was about the timeline for the reading of the will. He asked if the lawyer worked on weekends. I looked at them, these vultures circling a carcass that was not even cold yet, and I felt a wave of nausea. I had to get out. I had to get to New York. I am leaving, I announced, grabbing my suitcase. My mother stopped mid-sob, her phone frozen in her hand. Leaving. Your grandfather just died, Dominique. How can you be so selfish? I have work, Mom. I lied, my voice flat. My boss needs me back at the shop. We have a big inventory day. If I don't go, I lose my job. And unlike you, I need a paycheck to survive. Bianca scoffed from the kitchen island where she was already looking up black designer dresses online. Let her go, Mom. It is just a retail job. She probably has to tag price stickers on used furniture. We have real business to handle here anyway. Kyle nodded, looking relieved. Yeah, go. We don't need you here for the heavy lifting with the estate lawyers. Just come back for the funeral on Friday, and try to wear something that doesn't look like it came from a discount rack. I walked out the door without looking back. I drove the Honda Civic to O'Hare Airport, leaving it in the long-term parking lot. I bought a first-class ticket to New York City on the next flight out. As the plane climbed above the clouds, leaving the gray misery of Chicago behind, I closed my eyes. I was not running away. I was running toward the weapon I needed to end this war. I landed at JFK at 10 in the morning and took a town car straight to Manhattan. I did not go to my apartment. I went straight to 57th Street. The building was tall glass and imposing. The gold lettering above the revolving doors read, King's Auction House. It was one of the premier auction houses in the world, a place where billionaires came to trade history for 8-figure checks. I walked through the lobby. The security guard, a burly man named Henry, who had worked there for 20 years, nodded respectfully. Good morning, Ms. Vance. We did not expect you in today. I kept walking, my heels clicking on the marble floor with authority. I took the private elevator to the top floor. This was the executive level. The air here smelled of expensive leather and old money. I walked past the cubicles of the junior appraisers, past the offices of the department heads, until I reached the corner office with the view of Central Park. My assistant, a sharp young man named David, jumped up when he saw me. Dominique, he said, looking frantic. I mean, Ms. Vance, I thought you were on family leave. I walked into my office and threw my bag on the mahogany desk. I am David, but I have a personal acquisition to handle, a highly volatile one. Get me Marcus on the phone, now. Marcus was an underground broker, a man who specialized in moving high-value items quickly and quietly. He was the one who had bought the piano from my mother's buyer. David connected the call and put it on speaker. Marcus, I said, leaning over the desk. Where is the Steinway? Dominique Marcus's voice came through smooth and slippery. I thought you were out of town. Look, the item is already processed. It is in a container at Port Newark, the ship. The siren leaves for Dubai at 4 o'clock this afternoon. I have a buyer in the Emirates who is very eager to own a piece of Chicago jazz history. Stop the shipment, I ordered. I can't do that. Dom Marcus laughed. The deal is done. The paperwork is filed. Unless you have a court order, that container is going on that ship, and once it is in international waters, it is gone. I don't have a court order, I said, opening the safe behind my desk. I have something better. I have a checkbook. Marcus paused. You want to buy it back? Dominique, I paid your family's buyer a premium. My client in Dubai is offering $300,000. I pulled out my personal checkbook. My hands were steady. This was my life savings. This was every bonus. Every commission, every smart investment I had made over the last 10 years, while my family mocked me for being poor. I will pay you $400,000, Marcus, I said. A certified cashier's check. I can have a courier at your office in 20 minutes. Or I can call my contacts at Customs and tell them I suspect Container 4 Bravo contains undeclared organic ivory, which is illegal to export. They will hold your ship for weeks to inspect it. Your choice. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear Marcus doing the math. 400,000 was a massive profit for a day's work, and an ivory investigation would ruin his reputation. You play dirty, Vance Marcus muttered. I learned from the best, I replied, looking at a framed photo of Grandpa Cyrus on my desk. Do we have a deal? Fine, Marcus sighed. 400 grand. I will call the port authority and have the container pulled off the manifest. But you have to pick it up today. I don't want it sitting in my liability column. Done, I said. I hung up the phone and slumped into my leather chair. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I had just spent nearly $500,000 on a piano. To anyone else, it was insanity. To me, it was the smartest trade of my life. I had just secured the bearer bonds. I had just secured the diamonds. I had just secured the legacy. I pressed the intercom button. David, get the logistics team on the line. I need a climate-controlled transport truck at Port Newark within the hour. And David, book me a flight back to Chicago for tomorrow morning. You are going back? Ms. Vance? David asked, confused. Yes, I said, swiveling my chair to look out at the skyline of New York City, the city where I had built myself into a powerhouse, while my family thought I was a failure. I have a funeral to attend, I whispered. And after the funeral, I have a reading of a will. And I want to be there to see the look on their faces when they realize they brought a knife to a nuclear war. I picked up a pen and began to write the check. 4,000,000. The ink flowed smoothly onto the paper. It was a lot of money. But compared to the look on Kyle's face when the police would drag him away, it was a bargain. I tore the check from the book with a satisfying rip. The key was mine. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the mouse to take the cheese. The funeral of Cyrus Vance was not a memorial service. It was a red carpet production funded entirely by credit card debt and delusion. I arrived at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in a rental car, wearing a simple black dress and the pearl necklace my grandfather had given me for my 16th birthday. I expected to see a somber gathering of his old friends, the jazz musicians he played with, and the tenants he had helped over the years. Instead, I walked into a circus. The entrance to the church was flanked by two massive floral arrangements of white orchids that must have cost $5,000 apiece. There was a photographer standing near the vestibule snapping pictures of guests as if they were arriving at a gala. My mother, Patricia, was standing at the head of the receiving line. She was wearing a black dress that was far too tight and a hat so wide and elaborate it required its own zip code. A black veil covered her face, but I could see perfectly well that she was checking the brand of everyone's shoes as they walked in. She was playing the role of the grieving heiress to perfection, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief every time a camera flashed. I took a deep breath and walked toward the sanctuary. I kept my head high, clutching my purse against my side. Inside that purse was the receipt for the Steinway piano and the knowledge that I now held the keys to their destruction. I approached the front row, the pew reserved for immediate family. It was where I had sat every Sunday next to Grandpa for 20 years. But as I stepped toward the velvet rope, a young usher stepped in front of me. He looked embarrassed, refusing to meet my eyes. "I am sorry, Miss Vance," he whispered. "Your mother gave us a strict seating chart. The front pew is full." I looked past him. The front pew was indeed occupied. My mother sat in the center. Next to her was Bianca, scrolling on her phone, wearing huge sunglasses inside the church. And next to Bianca was Kyle. He was manspreading, taking up enough space for two people wearing a shiny black suit that looked like it was made of plastic. There was an empty space next to him, but it was filled with my mother's oversized purse and Bianca's designer clutch. Full, I repeated, my voice calm but cold. I am his granddaughter. I lived in his house for 18 years. The usher flinched. I know, Dominique. I am so sorry. She told us to seat you in row 12, behind the choir, row 12. The cheap seats. The message was loud and clear. In their version of the story, I was no longer family. I was a spectator. I did not argue. I did not make a scene. I simply nodded and walked back to row 12. I sat down on the hard wooden bench surrounded by distant cousins who ignored me and neighbors who whispered behind their hands. From this vantage point, I had a perfect view of the back of Kyle's head. I watched him lean over and whisper something to Bianca during the opening prayer. I saw Bianca giggle. At a funeral. The service began. The choir sang their voices soaring to the rafters, but the beauty of the music was tainted by the falseness of the people in the front row. When it was time for the eulogy, my mother walked up to the pulpit. She spoke for 20 minutes. She talked about her sacrifice, her burden, and how difficult it was to care for an aging parent. She barely mentioned Grandpa's kindness, his love for music, or his business acumen. It was the Patricia Show starring Patricia with a guest appearance by the deceased. After the eulogy, while the organist played a soft interlude, I saw Kyle pull out his phone. He held it low, trying to be discreet, but I could see the screen's glow reflecting off his sunglasses. He wasn't looking at scripture. He was looking at architectural blueprints. I felt a surge of nausea. I stood up quietly, pretending to need the restroom, and moved to the side aisle. I walked softly along the carpeted edge of the sanctuary until I was parallel with the front row, hidden partially by a stone pillar. I needed to hear what they were saying. Kyle leaned into Bianca, his voice a low hiss that carried in the quiet moment between hymns. I just got the text from the contractor, Kyle whispered. He says if we bulldoze the main structure by Monday, we can have the foundation poured for the condos by next month. Bianca checked her nails. Are you sure we have to tear it down? The house is kind of a vibe for photos. It is a money pit, B. Kyle snapped. The land is worth 4 times the house. We knocked down that old Victorian trash, subdivide the lot, and put up 12 luxury micro units. We call it the Vance Collection. Minimalist, modern, high rent. We will be bringing in 50 grand a month in passive income. They were going to demolish it. They were going to take the home, where I learned to walk, the home where Grandpa taught me to play piano, the home he built with his own hands, and turn it into soulless micro-apartments for yuppies. They were going to erase him completely. I stepped back into the shadows, my hands trembling. This wasn't just greed anymore. This was a desecration. I returned to my seat in row 12 just as the service was ending. My heart was pounding a war drum against my ribs. I looked at the back of Kyle's neck and imagined the tightening of a noose. As the final hymn began, the heavy oak doors at the very back of the church creaked open. A shaft of daylight cut through the dim sanctuary. Heads turned. Standing in the doorway was a figure that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. It was Mr. Sterling. He was not dressed for a funeral. He was dressed for court. He wore a charcoal gray 3-piece suit that cost more than Kyle's life insurance policy. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a black umbrella in the other, looking like the grim reaper of corporate law. He did not walk to a seat. He stood at the back, his arms crossed, scanning the room. His eyes swept over the crowd, over the flowers, over the weeping performance of my mother. And then his gaze landed on the front row. He looked at Kyle and Bianca with an expression I had only seen once before. It was the look a predator gives a wounded animal before the final strike. It was a look of absolute, terrifying pity. Then his eyes found mine in row 12. He did not smile. He simply gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The signal was given. The trap was primed. The pallbearers began to carry the casket out. My mother wailed theatrically, clinging to Kyle's arm. They walked past Mr. Sterling without even noticing him, too absorbed in their own self-importance. But I saw him. As I walked past him to exit the church, Sterling fell into step beside me. "Did you get it?" he whispered, looking straight ahead. "It is in a climate-controlled truck headed for a secure facility in Chicago," I replied softly. "Good," Sterling said. "Enjoy the burial, Dominique. Say your goodbyes. Because tomorrow morning at the reading of the will, we are going to bury them." I walked out into the blinding sunlight. My mother was already posing for photos next to the hearse. Kyle was shaking hands with people, acting like the patriarch he desperately wanted to be. "Bulldoze it by Monday," I thought, replaying Kyle's words. I looked at the freshly polished Mercedes G-Wagon parked illegally in the clergy spot. "You won't even own the shirt on your back by Monday." The repast was held at the house immediately following the burial. In our culture, the reception after a funeral is supposed to be a time of comfort, where you eat soul food, share memories, and let the laughter of children chase away the shadow of death. But as I walked through the front door of my grandfather's estate, the atmosphere did not feel like a gathering of mourners. It felt like a hostile takeover. My mother had ordered enough food to feed an army paying for it, with credit she assumed would be wiped clean by the estate. There were trays of fried chicken, collard greens, and mac and cheese spread out on the antique mahogany dining table where Grandpa used to teach me algebra. People were eating off paper plates, wiping grease on their chins, and talking loudly about football and the weather. Nobody was talking about Cyrus Vance. To them, the house was just a venue, and the funeral was just the opening act for the real event, the reading of the will. I grabbed a glass of water and stood in the corner of the living room, feeling like a ghost in my own home. I watched my mother holding court in the center of the room. She had removed her veil and was laughing at something the pastor said, her hand resting possessively on the back of Grandpa's favorite leather armchair. She looked triumphant. She looked like a queen who had finally ascended the throne after a long, tedious wait. Then the front door opened again. It wasn't a guest. Kyle walked in, followed closely by a man wearing dusty work boots, jeans, and a utility belt. The man was holding a clipboard, a laser measuring tool, and a can of neon orange spray paint. He looked like he had just walked off a construction site, completely out of place among the suits and black dresses. I straightened up, my senses going on high alert. Kyle led the man into the foyer, talking loudly over the murmur of the guests. "Yeah, so the main load-bearing wall is here," Kyle said, pointing a beer bottle at the archway that separated the living room from the dining room. "We want to blow this out completely. Open concept for the micro units. We need to maximize the square footage for the rental yield." The contractor nodded, chewing on a toothpick. He pulled the cap off the spray paint can. He shook it. The rattle of the ball bearing inside the can sounded like a gunshot in the crowded room. "Got it," the contractor grunted. "Mark it for demo." He raised the can and sprayed a thick, jagged orange line right across the vintage floral wallpaper. The smell of chemical fumes instantly cut through the aroma of the food. I gasped. That wallpaper had been chosen by my grandmother 40 years ago. It was hand-painted silk from France. And this man had just defaced it like it was an alleyway dumpster. I moved before I could think. I pushed past a group of cousins and marched right up to Kyle and the contractor. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice trembling with rage. "What do you think you are doing?" The room went silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. All eyes turned to us. Kyle looked at me, annoyed, like I was a fly buzzing around his head. "Relax, Dominique. We are just getting a head start. Time is money. We need the demo crew in here by Tuesday." "You are spray painting the walls while his body is not even cold," I screamed, pointing at the orange scar on the wallpaper. "This is a funeral, Kyle. Have you no respect? Get this man out of here. Now!" I turned to the contractor. "Get out. Get out of this house before I call the police." The contractor looked at Kyle, unsure. Kyle's face turned red. His ego was being bruised in front of his friends and investors. "Do not talk to my contractors like that," Kyle spat, stepping into my personal space. "You don't make the decisions here, Dominique. You are a guest. A guest who is barely tolerated. I am his granddaughter, I fired back, standing my ground. And this is his home, not your construction site. Suddenly, a blur of black fabric moved across my vision. Slap. The sound was loud, sharp, and sickening. My head snapped to the side. A stinging heat exploded across my left cheek. The room gasped. I stood there, stunned, tasting the metallic tang of blood where my tooth had cut my lip. I slowly turned my head back. My mother was standing there, her hand still raised, her chest heaving. Her eyes were wild, not with grief but with power. "Do not you dare embarrass us," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You do not have the right to speak. You do not have the right to give orders." She took a step closer to me, poking me hard in the chest with a manicured fingernail. "I am the sole heir, Dominique. According to the law, everything in this house from the roof to the basement belongs to me. If I want to paint it orange, I will paint it orange. If I want to burn it down, I will burn it down. And if I want to kick you out, I can do that too." She looked around the room, addressing the shocked guests. "My daughter is emotional," she announced, smoothing down her dress. "She is clearly not handling her grief well. Perhaps she needs some fresh air." Kyle smirked, taking a sip of his beer. "Yeah, Dom. Go for a walk. Let the adults handle the business." I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, who was supposed to protect me. I saw nothing in her eyes but greed and a bottomless need for validation. I raised my hand and touched my burning cheek. The pain was real, but strangely the anger was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, absolute certainty. "You are right, Mother," I said softly, my voice deadly calm. "You are the heir. You are in charge. Do whatever you want." I looked at the orange paint on the wall. "Paint the whole house," I added. "It suits you." I turned around and walked toward the door. As I passed the contractor, I stopped and looked him in the eye. "Make sure you get paid in cash," I whispered to him. "Up front." I walked out of the house and onto the front porch. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. I could hear the party starting up again inside, the laughter a little too loud, a little too forced. I touched my cheek again. That slap was the final receipt. She had just claimed ownership of everything, which meant she had also claimed ownership of the consequences. I looked back at the house one last time. Through the window, I could see the contractor spraying another line on the wall. "Go ahead," I thought, a small dark smile touching my lips. "Mark the territory. You are just saving the bank the trouble of marking it for foreclosure. You are not renovating a home. You are decorating your own tomb." I walked to my rental car and got in. I checked my phone. I had a message from Mr. Sterling. "Everything is ready for tomorrow morning. Sleep well, Dominique." I started the engine. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to wait. The countdown was over. The explosion was set for 9 a.m. sharp. The bass from the music downstairs was vibrating through the floorboards of my childhood bedroom. It was a rhythmic, relentless thumping that felt like a headache trying to break through the wood. I sat on the edge of my single bed, the one with the quilt my grandmother had stitched by hand 30 years ago. The room was exactly as I had left it when I moved to New York. The walls were still painted a soft lavender. The bookshelves were still lined with my old art history textbooks, and the window still looked out over the oak tree in the backyard. But the house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a corpse that was being picked clean by scavengers while it was still warm. I could hear them downstairs. The funeral reception had officially turned into a rager. The mourning period had lasted approximately 2 hours before Kyle broke out the expensive tequila. I heard glass shattering, followed by raucous laughter. I heard Bianca screeching along to a pop song, her voice slurred and shrill. They were celebrating. They were toasting to the future, to the demolition of this house, to the millions of dollars they thought were sitting in bank accounts waiting for them. They were dancing on the grave of the man who had built the floor they were standing on. I looked at the clock on my nightstand. It was 11:45 at night. The reading of the will was scheduled for 9 o'clock the next morning. Less than 10 hours. My phone sitting on the pillow beside me lit up. No ringtone, just a silent white glow in the dark room. I picked it up. The notification was from a secure email server. The sender was Arthur Sterling. The subject line was simply one word: executed. I unlocked the phone and opened the email. The text was brief, clinical, and absolutely devastating. Dear Dominique, the paperwork has been finalized. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division has received the tip and the supporting evidence regarding the unreported transaction of the piano. Given the amount and the flagrant nature of the tax evasion, coupled with the misuse of the medical power of attorney, they have expedited the process. A federal subpoena will be served to Patricia Vance at 8:05 tomorrow morning. Simultaneously, a freeze order has been placed on the accounts associated with her Social Security number to prevent asset flight. The trap is set. Get some sleep. You have a big day tomorrow. I read the email twice, then a third time. I felt a cold knot loosen in my chest. It was done. There was no turning back now. The wheels of the federal government were turning, grinding slowly but exceedingly fine. My mother wasn't just going to lose the house. She was going to lose her freedom. And Kyle, who had tied his financial dinghy to her sinking ship, was going to drown right alongside her. I turned off the phone and stood up. The noise downstairs seemed louder now, more obnoxious. I could have stayed in my room. I could have locked the door, put in earplugs, and waited for the morning sun to bring justice. But a part of me, the part that had been slapped, ignored, and belittled for 3 decades, wanted one last look. I wanted to see them at the height of their arrogance. I wanted to burn the image of their celebration into my memory, so that I could compare it to the look on their faces tomorrow. I opened my bedroom door and walked out into the hallway. The music was deafening out here. I walked to the top of the staircase and looked down. The living room was a wreck. Paper plates were scattered on the antique rugs. Red plastic cups left rings on the mahogany side tables. The orange spray paint line that the contractor had sprayed earlier that day glowed under the recessed lighting like a jagged neon scar across the history of my family. Kyle was standing on the coffee table. He had taken off his suit jacket and unbuttoned his shirt. He was holding a bottle of champagne in one hand and a cigar in the other. Ash was falling onto the carpet, but he didn't care. Why would he care about a carpet in a house he was going to bulldoze on Monday? I told you, baby, Kyle shouted to Bianca, who was dancing with one of her influencer friends. We are going to be the kings of Chicago. The Vance collection is going to be global. We will buy a place in Miami for the winter. No more snow, no more budget, just top-tier living. Bianca cheered, raising her glass. To us, she screamed. To the winners. I walked down the stairs. I moved slowly, my hand gliding along the polished wood of the banister. I felt like a ghost descending into a banquet of fools. At the bottom of the stairs, I walked past them toward the kitchen. Nobody noticed me at first. They were too drunk on cheap fame and expensive liquor. I found a clean wine glass in the cabinet. I took a bottle of red wine that had been left open on the counter. It was a vintage Cabernet that Grandpa had been saving for his 90th birthday. They had opened it to make sangria. I poured a small amount into my glass. I swirled it, watching the crimson liquid coat the sides. Then I walked back into the living room. Kyle spotted me then. He wobbled on the coffee table, pointing the cigar at me. Well, 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 he slurred, a lopsided grin plastering his face. Look who came down from her ivory tower. The art lady. Did you get hungry, Dom? Did you finally realize that the party is where the money is? Bianca stopped dancing and looked at me, her eyes glassy. Don't be mean, Kyle, she giggled, clearly not meaning it. She is just sad because she has to go back to her little job tomorrow while we start our empire. My mother was sitting on the sofa fanning herself with a napkin. She looked exhausted but smug. "Leave her alone," she said lazily. "Let her have a drink. It is the last time she will be drinking this quality of wine." I walked until I was standing right in front of the coffee table. I looked up at Kyle. He looked like a giant from this angle, looming over me, confident and untouchable. But I knew the truth. I knew that he was standing on a trapdoor, and I was holding the lever. "I am not sad, Bianca," I said, my voice cutting through the bass of the music. "And I am not hungry, Kyle." I raised my glass slightly, catching the light. "I just wanted to join the toast," I said. Kyle laughed, nearly losing his balance. "Oh yeah. And what are we toasting to, Dom? Your bus ticket back to New York?" I smiled. It was a small smile. It did not reach my eyes. "I am toasting to the moment," I said softly. I looked at the orange paint on the wall. I looked at the ash on the carpet. I looked at my mother's diamond earrings. "Enjoy it," I said, looking Kyle dead in the eye. "Eat, drink, and be merry. Because this is the absolute peak of your life. Right here, right now." Kyle frowned, confused by my tone. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," I continued, taking a slow sip of the wine, "that history has a funny way of repeating itself. Tonight reminds me of a very famous dinner. You know the one. 12 guests, one betrayal, and a very bad ending for the guys in charge." I lowered the glass. "Tanya Huang Di Nye," I whispered, slipping into the broken French that Grandpa used to joke with. "Enjoy it. This is the Last Supper," Kyle scoffed, jumping down from the table. "You are weird, Dominique. You are drunk. Go back to bed. We have real business to handle in the morning with Sterling." "Yes," I said, turning away. "Real business." I walked toward the stairs, leaving them to their noise. Behind me, I heard Kyle mutter something about me being jealous. I heard the pop of another champagne cork. I climbed the stairs back to my room. Every step felt lighter. Every step took me further away from their wreckage and closer to my freedom. I entered my room and closed the door, shutting out the chaos. I lay back down on the bed and pulled the quilt up to my chin. I closed my eyes and listened to the bass thumping below. It didn't bother me anymore. It sounded like a heartbeat. It sounded like a countdown. 10 hours, 9 hours. I fell asleep with the taste of Grandpa's wine on my lips and the promise of total victory in my dreams. The silence in my room was heavy, not with loneliness, but with the peace of a loaded gun waiting to be fired. The conference room at Sterling and Associates was designed to make you feel small. The walls were lined with dark oak paneling that smelled of lemon oil and intimidation. The long mahogany table was polished to such a high shine that I could see the reflection of my family's greed in the wood. It was 9 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. Outside, the Chicago sky was a flat, miserable gray. But inside this room, the air was electric with anticipation. I sat at the far end of the table, sipping a glass of water. I was wearing a tailored navy suit, the kind of outfit that said I was here for business, not for a handout. Opposite me sat the 3 people who had made my life a living hell for 30 years. My mother, Patricia, was wearing a black veil again, though she had paired it with a diamond brooch that looked suspiciously new. She was tapping her long acrylic nails against the table, a rapid clicking rhythm that betrayed her impatience. Next to her was Bianca, who looked bored, scrolling through her phone under the table. And then there was Kyle. Kyle looked terrible. He was wearing sunglasses indoors, hiding a hangover that probably cost $50 a glass. He was sweating despite the aggressive air conditioning. Every few seconds he would wipe his forehead with a handkerchief and check his watch. I knew why. He was calculating interest rates. He was wondering if the loan shark Marco was already awake and looking for his money. The heavy door opened and Mr. Sterling walked in. He did not say good morning. He did not offer condolences. He simply walked to the head of the table, placed a single thick leather folder on the surface, and sat down. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked at my family with the same expression one might look at a stain on a silk tie. "Let us begin," Sterling said, his voice deep and devoid of warmth. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Cyrus Vance." As the executor of this estate, I am bound by law to follow his instructions to the letter. Any outbursts, interruptions, or disrespect will result in your immediate removal from this office by security. My mother scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. We are not children, Arthur. Just read the document. We all know how this goes. I am the only child. Just tell us the total so we can go to the bank. Sterling looked at her over the rim of his glasses. He opened the folder. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. Article 1. Sterling read. Regarding the distribution of liquid cash assets, stocks, and bonds held in the primary accounts. Kyle leaned forward, practically drooling. This was it, the big payday. To my granddaughter Bianca, Sterling read, I leave the sum of $5,000. I hope you use it to take a class on humility, though I doubt it will be enough. Bianca looked up from her phone, her jaw dropping. 5,000? That is it. That does not even cover my credit card bill for this month. That is a joke, right? Sterling ignored her. To my granddaughter Dominique, I leave my collection of vintage jazz records and the sum of $10,000. I nodded respectfully. Thank you, I whispered. 10,000, Kyle muttered, scoffing. Chump change. Okay, get to the real money. Get to Patricia's share. Sterling turned the page. To my daughter Patricia, I leave the entire remaining balance of my liquid cash assets. My mother clasped her hands together, looking up at the ceiling. Thank you, Jesus. Finally. How much is it, Arthur? 2 million. 3. Sterling looked at the paper, then back at my mother. He cleared his throat. The total amount to be dispersed to Patricia Vance is exactly $1. The room went dead silent. It was a silence so heavy it felt like it could crush your ribs. My mother froze, her hands still clasped in prayer, her eyes bulging. Excuse me, she whispered, her voice trembling. Did you say 1 million? I said $1. Sterling repeated, his voice cutting like a razor. $1 single. That is impossible, Kyle shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The old man was loaded. He had accounts all over the city. Where is the money? Sterling calmly slid a piece of paper across the table toward my mother. It was a bank statement. The will states, Sterling continued, that any substantial assets removed from the estate by a beneficiary within 30 days of my death shall be considered an early advance on their inheritance. My mother picked up the paper, her hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. Mr. Vance was aware of the sale of his Steinway Model B piano yesterday morning, Sterling said, locking eyes with my mother. You sold it for $195,000. You used his medical power of attorney to facilitate an unauthorized transaction. Mr. Vance decided that since you were so eager to get your hands on his money that you could not wait for him to die, that $195,000 would serve as your full and final cash inheritance. In fact, based on the current value of his other accounts, you actually owe the estate money, but he decided to be generous and leave you with $1. My mother made a sound that I had never heard a human make before. It was a strangled, high-pitched screech of pure rage. She stood up so fast her heavy oak chair tipped over and crashed to the floor. That old bastard, she screamed, her face turning a violent shade of purple. He did this on purpose. He knew. He knew I was selling it. He tricked me. She grabbed the glass of water in front of her and threw it against the wall. It shattered, spraying water and glass everywhere. I took care of him, she shrieked, pacing the room like a caged animal. I visited him. I sat in that smelly hospice room. And this is how he repays me, by counting pennies from the grave. That money is gone, Arthur. We spent it. We bought the car. We have bills. Sterling did not flinch. That is not my concern, Patricia. You spent your inheritance before you received it. That is a lesson in patience you should have learned in kindergarten. Kyle looked like he was going to vomit. He slumped back in his chair, his skin turning a sickly shade of gray. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. $1. He had promised the loan shark 100,000. He was a dead man walking. You have to fix this, Kyle stammered, looking at Sterling. You are a lawyer. Find a loophole. We can contest this. He was incompetent. He was crazy. I will not have you slander my client. Sterling snapped. Cyrus Vance was of sound mind and body until the moment he took his last breath. He was simply smarter than you. Bianca started crying, but it wasn't sad crying. It was angry crying. "This is so unfair," she whined. "I already posted the G-Wagon. People think we are rich. How am I supposed to explain this?" My mother stopped pacing. She slammed her hands onto the table and leaned into Sterling's face. "I want the house," she hissed. "Forget the cash. The cash is peanuts. The house is worth millions. I am the only child. The real estate laws in this state are clear. The house comes to me." I took another sip of my water. This was the moment. This was the cliff. Sterling looked at my mother. He closed the folder containing the cash details and opened a second larger folder. He took a long, slow breath. "Sit down," Mrs. Vance Sterling said quietly. "Pick up your chair and sit down. Because we have not discussed Article 2 yet. The real estate." My mother smirked, a grotesque expression of entitlement returning to her face. She righted her chair and sat down, smoothing her dress. "That is right," she said, glaring at me. "The house, the land, the Oak Park estate. Current market value $4.2 million, and we all know who gets that." Sterling looked at the document. "The house," he began, "is a unique asset. Mr. Vance believed that a home is not just a financial instrument, but a vessel for family history. Therefore, he did not leave the house to a specific person by name." Kyle sat up, his eyes widening. "What does that mean?" "It means," Sterling said, looking at each of us in turn, "that he left the house to a condition that must be met by 12 o'clock noon today." He looked at the grandfather clock in the corner of the room. It was 10:15. "To whoever possesses the physical heart of this family," Sterling read, "I bequeath the physical body of the estate. The Oak Park property and all its contents shall pass immediately to the person who holds the legal title and physical possession of my 1928 Steinway piano serial number 284910. My mother stopped breathing. Kyle stopped breathing. "If no family member possesses the piano by noon today," Sterling continued, "the house will be sold and 100% of the proceeds will be donated to the Chicago Society for Stray Cats." The silence returned. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was sharp. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging in the air. My mother looked at Kyle. Kyle looked at Bianca. And then all three of them looked at the clock. "The piano," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. "We sold the piano." "You did," Sterling said, checking his watch. "And you have exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes to get it back. If you want the house, you better hope the new owner is in a selling mood." The explosion of chaos that followed was music to my ears. Kyle scrambled for his phone, dropping it twice. My mother started screaming at Bianca to find the number of the antique dealer. I sat there perfectly still, watching them panic. I watched them run around the room like rats on a sinking ship. They had no idea that the new owner was sitting right across the table from them. They had no idea that the game was already over. I checked my own watch. It was time for the final act. The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was not the peaceful silence of a library or a church. It was the suffocating, airless silence of a bomb shelter right before the explosion. My mother Patricia sat frozen in her chair, her mouth slightly open, the $1 bank statement crinkled in her fist. Kyle looked like he had been punched in the gut, his face pale and slick with sweat. Bianca was just looking back and forth between them, her thumb hovering over her phone screen, too terrified to even scroll. Mr. Sterling did not rush. He was enjoying this. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the thick document in front of him, tracing a line with his finger. Article 2. Sterling read, his voice steady and projecting to the back of the room. "Regarding the primary residence located at 4500 Greenwood Avenue, Oak Park, Illinois, along with all stocks, bonds, and investment portfolios held within the Vance Family Trust." Kyle leaned forward, his eyes desperate. This was it. This was the lifeline. Even if the cash was gone, the house was worth millions. The land alone was a gold mine. I could hear him breathing short, shallow gasps of hope. Mr. Vance has stipulated that the family home is not merely an asset to be liquidated, Sterling continued. It is a vessel of history. It is the body that houses the soul of this family. And Mr. Vance believed that the soul of this family resided in one specific object. My mother frowned. What object? What are you talking about, Arthur? Just give me the deed. Sterling ignored her. He read from the page. Therefore, I, Cyrus Vance, hereby bequeath the entirety of the real estate and the investment portfolio to the individual who is in legal and physical possession of my 1928 Steinway Model B grand piano, serial number 284910, as of 12 o'clock noon on the day of this reading. Sterling paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. He looked up. The time is currently 10:15 in the morning. For a moment, nobody moved. The words had to travel through the thick fog of their greed before they actually landed. I watched the realization hit them in waves. First confusion, then disbelief, then absolute, unadulterated horror. Kyle was the first to speak. His voice was a high-pitched squeak. The piano. Yes, Sterling said calmly. The piano. The logic is written right here in your father's own handwriting. He wrote, "He who sells the past for a quick buck loses the future. But he who cherishes the legacy deserves to own the kingdom." My mother stood up slowly. She looked like she was walking underwater. Her hands were shaking so violently that her bracelets rattled against the table, but she stammered. "But we sold it. We sold it yesterday." Sterling nodded. "I am aware. You sold it for $195,000, a pittance compared to the $4.2 million estate you just forfeited." "No!" my mother screamed. "This is a trick. You cannot do this. I am the daughter. I am the heir. You cannot leave a house to a piano. That is insane." "It is not a trick," Patricia Sterling shot back, his voice hardening. "It is a conditional bequest. It is perfectly legal. Your father knew you. He knew exactly what you would do the moment his eyes closed. He set a test of character. And you failed it before the funeral was even over." Bianca dropped her phone. It hit the table with a loud crack. "Wait," she whispered, looking at Kyle. "If we don't have the piano, we don't get the house." Kyle turned to her, his eyes wild. "We don't get anything, Bianca. We don't get the house. We don't get the stocks. We don't get the land. We are broke." He turned to Sterling. "What happens if nobody has the piano at noon?" Sterling checked his watch. "If the piano is not in the possession of a family member by 12 p.m. today, the entire estate will be liquidated and the proceeds donated to the Chicago Society for Stray Cats. I believe your father was quite fond of animals. He found them more loyal than his children." Kyle looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. 10:17. "We have time," Kyle shouted, jumping up from his chair. "We have an hour and 45 minutes. We can buy it back." He grabbed my mother by the shoulders and shook her. "Patricia, where is the number? Where is the number for that dealer? Call him. Call him right now." My mother fumbled with her purse, dumping the contents onto the table. Lipstick tissues and breath mints scattered everywhere. She found a crumpled business card. "Here," she yelled, shoving it at Kyle. "His name is Marcus. Call him. Tell him we will pay double. Tell him we will pay anything." Kyle snatched the card and dialed the number, putting it on speakerphone. The ringing sound filled the room. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Pick up, you piece of trash!" Kyle hissed at the phone. "Hello," a smooth voice answered. Marcus. Kyle screamed. "This is Kyle, Patricia's son-in-law. We sold you the Steinway yesterday. We need it back. Right now." There was a pause on the line, then a laugh. "I am afraid that is impossible, Kyle. As I told your wife, I am a broker. I move inventory. That piano was processed and sold within an hour of me picking it up." "Sold?" Kyle roared, his face turning a deep, dangerous red. "To who? Who bought it?" "A private collector," Marcus replied. "A very motivated buyer. They paid a premium for immediate delivery." "I don't care," Kyle shouted. I will pay you double what they paid. I will give you $500,000. Just tell me where it is. $500,000? Marcus whistled. You must really love music. But like I said, it is out of my hands. The item is gone. Where did it go? Kyle begged, sweat dripping down his nose. Just give us a location. We can go get it. Please, my life depends on this. I heard some typing on the other end. Well, let me check the manifest. It looks like it was slated for export. But there was a change order this morning. Yes? Kyle said, leaning over the phone. Yes, tell me. It says here it was purchased by a local holding company, Marcus said. Nemesis Art LLC. Nemesis. Kyle repeated. Who are they? Where are they located? I don't have an address, Marcus said. Just a P.O. box. But the delivery address for the piano? That is interesting. What is the address? My mother screamed, leaning into the phone. Marcus paused. It says the delivery address is 4500 Greenwood Avenue. My mother froze. That is our address. That is the house. There was a confusing moment of silence. Why would someone buy the piano and send it back to the house? Sterling cleared his throat. Well, Sterling said, looking at his watch. If the piano is en route to the house, you might want to be there to receive it. Possession is 9/10 of the law, after all. Kyle looked at the clock. 10:22. We have to go. Kyle shouted. We have to beat the truck there. If we intercept it, if we sign for it, we possess it. He grabbed his car keys. Bianca, Mom, move. We are leaving. My mother scrambled to gather her things, looking terrified and hopeful at the same time. Maybe it is a miracle, she gasped. Maybe the Lord touched the buyer's heart. They rushed toward the door, pushing each other out of the way. Kyle stopped at the threshold and looked back at me. I was still sitting calmly in my chair, sipping my water. Are you coming, Dom? Kyle sneered. Or are you just going to sit there and watch us win? I looked at him. I looked at the fear in his eyes, masked by bravado. I will catch up, I said softly. I think I will take the scenic route. Kyle laughed, a manic, desperate sound. Suit yourself. Enjoy your $10,000. We are going to get our millions. He slammed the door behind him. I could hear them running down the hallway, their footsteps echoing like a stampede of frightened cattle. The room fell silent again. Just me and Mr. Sterling. Sterling closed the folder. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with a silk cloth. They are going to drive very fast, Sterling remarked dryly. Yes, I said. They are. Do you think they will make it in time? He asked. I checked my watch. The traffic on the I-290 is terrible at this time of day, but even if they make it, it won't matter. Sterling smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Why is that, Dominique? Because I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. The will says they need legal title and physical possession. They might intercept the truck. They might even touch the piano. But they will never have the title. I picked up my purse. I patted the side pocket where the bill of sale and the certificate of authenticity were sitting safely next to my lipstick. Nemesis. Art LLC, I said. I like the name. Grandpa always did have a flair for the dramatic. I walked to the door. Shall we go watch the finale, Mr. Sterling? After you, Ms. Vance. We walked out of the office at a leisurely pace. There was no need to run. The trap was sprung. The rats were racing toward the cheese, unaware that the cheese was wired to a stick of dynamite, and I had the detonator in my pocket. I watched my family sprint down the hallway of the law firm like rats fleeing a sinking ship. They scrambled into the elevator, pushing each other out of the way, desperate to reach the parking garage. I did not run. I walked to the window of Mr. Sterling's office and looked down at the street below. A few minutes later, I saw the black Mercedes G-Wagon peel out of the garage, cutting off a taxi and running a red light. I knew exactly what was happening inside that car. Based on the cell phone records and the testimony that would come out later in court, the next 30 minutes were a masterclass in panic and stupidity. Inside the leather interior of the G-Wagon, the air was thick with the smell of fear and expensive cologne. Kyle was driving with one hand on the wheel and the other clutching his phone. He was doing 90 miles an hour in a 45-mile-an-hour zone, weaving through the morning traffic on the I-290 expressway. My mother, Patricia, was in the passenger seat clutching the dashboard and screaming at him to drive faster. Bianca was in the back sobbing and refreshing the tracking app on her phone, as if that would somehow make the piano appear. Kyle had Marcus the broker on speakerphone. The connection was crackly, but the broker's voice was calm, almost bored. "Marcus, listen to me," Kyle screamed, swerving around a delivery truck. "We are on our way. We are 20 minutes from the house. Tell the driver to wait. Do not let him unload that piano until we get there." "I cannot control traffic," Kyle Marcus replied smoothly. "The driver is scheduled to arrive at noon. He has strict instructions to deliver the item to the person inside the house." "We will be there," Kyle yelled, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Just tell me the price. You said the new owner paid a premium. I will beat it. How much?" There was a pause on the line, a pause that cost more than my sister's entire wardrobe. "The new owner paid $400,000, Marcus said, but they have instructed me that they are willing to part with it for a quick profit. The buyback price is $1 million. $1 million! My mother shrieked, her voice cracking. "That is extortion. That is robbery." "That is the market, lady," Marcus shot back. "Supply and demand. You have a deadline. My client knows about the will. They know you need this piano to unlock a $4 million estate. Honestly, $1 million is a bargain. Do you want it or not?" Kyle slammed his hand against the steering wheel. "We don't have $1 million cash. We have assets. We have the house." Marcus laughed. "You don't have the house yet, Kyle. That is the whole point. Cash. Wire transfer. Immediate funds. Or the driver turns around and you lose everything. You have 10 minutes to confirm the funds." The line went dead. The silence in the car was deafening. $1 million. They were broke. My mother had $1 to her name. Bianca had 5,000. And Kyle was already in debt. "We are dead," Bianca whispered from the back seat. "We are homeless." "No," Kyle said, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He looked in the rearview mirror. He looked at the desperation on his wife's face. He looked at the greed on his mother-in-law's face. And then he made the decision that would seal his fate. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a number saved only as M. "Who are you calling?" my mother asked, her hands trembling. "The only person in Chicago who has that kind of cash and doesn't ask questions." Kyle grunted. He pressed dial. The phone rang 4 times. Then a low, gravelly voice answered. "You have a lot of nerve calling me Kyle, unless you are calling to tell me you have my 50 grand. It is Marco." The loan shark. The man Kyle had met in the back room of a shady poker game 3 months ago. "Marco, listen." Kyle spoke fast, his words tripping over each other. "I have an opportunity. A life-or-death opportunity. I need a bridge loan. Big money. I am not a bank." "Kyle," Marco growled, "and you are a bad risk." "I am not a risk," Kyle shouted. "I am about to inherit a $4 million estate. The paperwork is done. The will is read. I just need to buy back one asset to unlock the deed. I need $1 million wired to a corporate account in the next 5 minutes." There was a long silence on the other end. Marco was listening. Marco smelled blood. "1 million, Marco said slowly. "That is a lot of zeros. What is the collateral?" "Everything," Kyle promised, pressing the accelerator until the speedometer hit 100. "I will give you the title to the house by tonight. I will give you the G-Wagon I am driving right now. It is worth 200 grand. Take it all. Just send the money." "The G-Wagon is leased, isn't it?" Marco asked. "I will buy out the lease," Kyle lied. "Look, Marco, if I get this house, I will pay you back 1.5 million by tomorrow morning. $500,000 profit in 24 hours. Who else gives you that return?" Marco paused. He was a predator, and he knew desperation when he heard it. But he also knew greed. 500 grand profit for a day's work was tempting. If the money is not back in my account by noon tomorrow, Marco said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was scarier than a scream. I don't just take the house, I take your knees, and then I take your wife. Do you understand me? Kyle swallowed hard. He looked at Bianca in the rearview mirror. She was fixing her makeup, oblivious to the fact that she had just been bartered like cattle. I understand, Kyle said hoarsely. Send it. I am texting you the broker's wire details now. Kyle hung up. He frantically typed the account number Marcus had given him and hit send. A moment later, his phone buzzed. Transfer confirmed. He let out a scream of victory that sounded more like a maniacal laugh. We got it, he yelled, pounding the dashboard. We got the money. We are buying the piano. We are getting the house. My mother started clapping, praising Jesus for sending a loan shark to save them. Bianca cheered, already planning her victory post on TikTok. They were flying down the highway, fueled by adrenaline and delusion. They thought they had won. They thought they had pulled off the miracle of the century. They had no idea that they had just signed a deal with the devil. Drive, Kyle, my mother urged, pointing at the exit sign for Oak Park. Do not let that truck beat us. I am driving, Kyle shouted, swerving across 3 lanes of traffic to make the exit. The tires of the heavy SUV screeched in protest. He ran a red light at the bottom of the ramp, narrowly missing a school bus. They tore through the quiet suburban streets of Oak Park, the engine roaring like a beast. They were 5 minutes away. Check the time, Kyle yelled. 10:45, Bianca replied. We have plenty of time. Call the broker back, Kyle ordered. Tell him the money is sent. Tell him to instruct the driver to hand the piano to me and only me. Bianca dialed. She put it on speaker. Marcus, she chirped, the money is there. $1 million. Check your account. I see it, Marcus replied, sounding impressed. You people are crazy. But money is money. The driver is pulling onto Greenwood Avenue now. He is parking in front of the estate. We are 2 blocks away. Kyle screamed. Tell him to wait. He is waiting, Marcus said. But he is on a schedule. You better hurry. Kyle floored it. The G-Wagon hit a speed bump so hard that my mother's head hit the roof of the car. They turned onto Greenwood Avenue, the tires smoking. And there it was. Parked right in front of the wrought iron gates of my grandfather's house was a large white delivery truck. The back liftgate was already down. 2 men in blue uniforms were carefully wheeling a large mahogany object down the ramp. It was the Steinway. It gleamed in the overcast light, beautiful and majestic. There it is, my mother screamed, pointing a shaking finger. My inheritance! Kyle slammed on the brakes. The G-Wagon skidded to a halt inches from the bumper of the delivery truck. He didn't even put the car in park. He threw the door open and sprinted toward the movers. Don't touch it, Kyle bellowed, running up the driveway, waving his arms like a lunatic. That is mine. I bought it. My mother and Bianca scrambled out of the car and ran after him, their heels clicking on the pavement. They surrounded the piano like a pack of wolves. We have the receipt, Kyle panted, shoving his phone in the driver's face. $1 million. We paid it. Hand it over. The delivery driver, a burly man who looked like he had seen everything, just shrugged. Name, the driver asked, holding out a digital clipboard. Kyle Vance, Kyle said breathlessly. The driver checked his screen. He frowned. I don't have a Kyle Vance on the order, the driver said. What? Kyle screamed. I just wired $1 million. Call Marcus. Call the broker. I don't know who Marcus is, the driver said calmly. My instructions come from the owner of the shipping company. I was told to deliver this piano to the legal resident of 4500 Greenwood Avenue. That is us, my mother interjected, stepping forward and flashing her most charming fake smile. I am Patricia Vance. This is my house. I am the legal resident. The driver looked at her. He looked at the house. He looked at his clipboard again. Well, ma'am, if you have the keys to the front door and you can sign for it, it is yours. Yes, my mother cried, tears of joy streaming down her face. I have the keys. I have them right here. She fumbled in her purse, her hands shaking so hard she dropped her lipstick. She pulled out the heavy brass keyring that belonged to my grandfather. See, she said, holding them up triumphantly. I am the owner. Kyle let out a sigh of relief that was so deep his knees almost buckled. They had done it. They had beaten the clock. They had beaten the lawyer. They had beaten me. Sign here, the driver said, holding out the stylus. Kyle grabbed the stylus. He was about to sign his name, about to claim the prize that would pay off the loan shark and secure his future. But just as the tip of the pen touched the screen, a horn honked behind them. Not a car horn, a polite rhythmic beep. They turned around. Pulling into the driveway right behind the G-Wagon was a sleek, black town car. The window rolled down slowly, and there I was. I was sitting in the back seat, holding a bottle of water, looking fresh, calm, and utterly unbothered. "Hello, Mother," I called out. "Hello, Kyle." Kyle stared at me, the stylus freezing in his hand. "What are you doing here, Dom? You lost. Go home. We are signing for the piano." I opened the car door and stepped out. I walked slowly up the driveway, my heels echoing in the silence. "I don't think you can sign for that, Kyle," I said softly. "And why not?" he sneered. "Because I said, stopping right in front of the piano and running my hand along the smooth wood. The driver said he needs to deliver it to the legal resident." "I am the legal resident," my mother shouted. "I have the keys." "You have the keys to the door, Mother," I corrected her. "But you don't have the keys to the lock that matters." I turned to the driver. "Excuse me, sir. Does your delivery order specify a company name for the recipient?" The driver looked at his clipboard. "Yeah," he said. "It says here the recipient is Nemesis Art LLC." My mother's face went pale. Kyle dropped the stylus. "Nemesis," Kyle whispered. "That is the name the broker mentioned." "Yes," I said, smiling. "And do you know who the registered agent of Nemesis Art LLC is?" I reached into my purse. I didn't pull out keys. I pulled out a stamped, notarized document from the Secretary of State. I held it up for them to see. "It is me," I said. I turned to the driver. "My name is Dominique Vance. I am the owner of Nemesis Art LLC. I purchased this piano this morning for $400,000. I have the bill of sale right here." I handed the paperwork to the driver. He scanned it. He nodded. "Looks like everything is in order," Ms. Vance, the driver said. "Where do you want it?" "Put it in the living room," I said. "Right back where it belongs." Kyle stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The $1 million he had just wired was gone, sent to a broker for a piano that had already been sold to me hours ago. But we paid," Kyle stammered. "We sent the money." "Then you should probably call your broker," I said coldly. "Sounds like you just made a very generous donation to his retirement fund." I looked at the G-Wagon. I looked at Kyle's trembling hands. "And Kyle," I added, leaning in close, so only he could hear. "I hope you kept the receipt for that loan. Because Marco is not going to be happy when he finds out you just spent his money on a piano you don't even own." The look of pure terror that washed over Kyle's face was worth every penny I had spent. I walked past them up the steps to the front door. I unlocked it with my own set of keys. I held the door open for the movers. "Bring it in, gentlemen," I said. And as the piano rolled past my family, leaving them standing in the driveway with nothing but debt and despair, I finally allowed myself to laugh. The mahogany legs of the Steinway hit the hardwood floor of the living room with a heavy, resonant thud. It was 11:55 in the morning. The air in the room was so thick with tension, it felt like breathing underwater. The movers, two large men who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, stepped back, wiping sweat from their foreheads. They had done their job. The piano was back in its rightful place, sitting in the exact indentations it had left only 24 hours ago. But the atmosphere was not one of restoration. It was one of war. I stood by the window watching the gray light of the Chicago sky filter through the lace curtains. I checked my watch. 5 minutes. We had 5 minutes until the deadline. My mother Patricia was pacing in circles near the fireplace, muttering prayers under her breath, her hands clutching her rosary so tight her knuckles were white. Bianca was slumped on the sofa, chewing her fingernails, her eyes darting between the grandfather clock in the corner and the front door where Kyle was frantically pacing. Kyle looked like a man on the verge of a cardiac event. His suit was rumpled, his tie was loosened, and his eyes were wild. He was holding a heavy leather briefcase that he had retrieved from the trunk of the G-Wagon. I knew what was inside, or at least I knew what he claimed was inside. It was the physical manifestation of the wire transfer he had promised the broker. It was his last desperate gamble. He marched over to me, slamming the briefcase onto the lid of the piano. The sound echoed through the silent room, a harsh, violent crack against the delicate wood. "Open it," Kyle commanded, his voice shaking. I looked at him calmly. "I don't think I will." "Open it!" he screamed, popping the latches himself. The lid flew open. Inside were stacks of cash, bundled in bank wrappers. It wasn't $1 million. It was probably 50,000, likely everything he had been able to scrape together physically from his safe and Marco's initial loan. It was a prop, a visual aid to back up his digital desperation. "Look at this," Dominique Kyle panted, gesturing at the money. "This is real cash. We wired the rest, $1 million total. It is yours, all of it. Just sign the transfer of ownership, right now, before the clock strikes 12. I looked at the money. It smelled of stale tobacco and greed. "Kyle," I said softly, "you are not listening." "I am listening," he interrupted, sweat dripping down his nose. "I am listening to the sound of you becoming a millionaire. Take the money, sign the paper. We get the house, you get the cash. Everyone wins. We keep it in the family." He looked at my mother for support. "Tell her, Patricia," he yelled. "Tell her to take the deal." My mother stopped pacing. She looked at me with eyes that were pleading, manipulative, and terrified all at once. "Dominique, baby," she crooned, her voice trembling. "Think about what you are doing. This is your family. We made a mistake. We admit it. But you don't need a house this big. You live in New York. You have your little life there. Take the money. Kyle is offering you a fortune. Grandpa would want us to share." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "Grandpa would want you to share," I repeated. "Is that why you sold his piano while he was on his deathbed? Was that sharing?" "That was a misunderstanding," my mother cried. "We needed liquidity, but we fixed it. The piano is back. Look at it. It is right here. We satisfied the condition." I walked over to the grandfather clock. The pendulum swung back and forth. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It was 11:58. "You didn't satisfy the condition, Mother," I said, turning to face them. "The will states that the owner of the estate must hold legal title to the piano." I pointed to myself. "I hold the title." Kyle grabbed a bundle of cash and shoved it toward me. "Then sell it to me," he roared. "Sell it to me right now. I am offering you $1 million for a piano you bought for $400,000. That is a $600,000 profit in 1 hour. Are you stupid? Do you hate money?" I looked at the cash in his hand. Then I looked him dead in the eye. "I don't hate money, Kyle. I just hate you." Kyle froze. The color drained from his face. "This isn't business." I continued, my voice cold and steady. "This is an eviction. I am not a broker. I am not a dealer. And this piano is not merchandise. It is my heritage. And frankly, I would not sell it to you for all the money in the world." Kyle dropped the money. The bundle hit the floor with a soft thud. He looked at the clock. The minute hand clicked forward. 11:59. "Please," Bianca whispered from the couch. She sounded small. She sounded like a child. "Dom, please. We don't have anywhere to go. The condo is in Kyle's name and he leveraged it." I looked at my sister. I felt a flicker of pity, but I snuffed it out instantly. She had laughed when I was forced to drive the dirty Honda. She had mocked my job. She had posted photos of the G-Wagon while Grandpa took his last breath. "You should have thought about that before you called me a failure, Bianca," I said. The seconds ticked away. 10 seconds, 9, 8. Kyle stared at the piano. He looked like he wanted to smash it. He looked like he wanted to grab it and run, but he couldn't move. He was paralyzed by the absolute finality of his loss. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The grandfather clock let out a low mechanical whir. Then the first chime rang out. Dong. The sound was deep and mournful. It vibrated through the floorboards. Dong. The front door opened. We all turned. Mr. Sterling walked in. He was holding a clipboard and checking his pocket watch. He walked into the center of the room, ignoring the cash scattered on the floor. He stopped in front of the piano. He looked at me. He looked at the piano. He looked at the clock. Dong. Sterling waited for the final chime to fade away. The silence that followed was absolute. "It is 12 o'clock," Sterling announced. His voice was devoid of emotion. It was the voice of the law. He looked at Kyle. "Mr. Vance, who holds the title to this instrument?" Kyle didn't answer. He just stared at the floor. "I asked you a question," Sterling said sharply. "Do you hold the title?" "No," Kyle whispered. "Do you?" Mrs. Vance, Sterling asked my mother. "No," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Sterling turned to me. "Ms. Vance, do you hold the title?" "Yes," I said. I handed him the bill of sale. Sterling glanced at it. He nodded. "Then, in accordance with Article 2 of the Last Will and Testament of Cyrus Vance, I hereby declare that the ownership of the property located at 4500 Greenwood Avenue, along with all contents, stocks and bonds held in the Vance Family Trust, is immediately transferred to Dominique Vance." He pulled a pen from his pocket and signed the document on his clipboard. The scratch of the pen sounded like a guillotine falling. "It is done," Sterling said. He looked at my family. "You are now trespassing on private property. The owner has the right to ask you to leave." My mother looked up, her face a mask of ruined mascara and despair. "Dominique," she wailed. "You can't do this. I am your mother. Where will I sleep?" I walked over to the piano. I ran my fingers over the keys. I played a single low note. "I don't know, Mother," I said. "But you have a brand new G-Wagon outside. I suggest you sleep in that, before the bank comes to take it." Kyle sank to his knees. He put his head in his hands. He knew what was coming next. He knew that outside that door the real world was waiting for him. The loan shark. The IRS. The debts. "Get out," I said quietly. They didn't move. I said, "Get out!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. "Get out of my house!" Slowly, painfully, they stood up. They gathered their purses. Kyle picked up his briefcase, though the money inside was now useless paper. They walked toward the door, dragging their feet, stripped of their arrogance, stripped of their future. As the door closed behind them, shutting out the gray Chicago light, I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. I turned to Sterling. "Thank you, Arthur," he smiled. "Do not thank me yet, Dominique. We still have to open the piano legs." I looked at the Steinway. The treasure chest was locked, but I had the key, and for the first time in my life, I was finally truly home. The grandfather clock had finished its toll, but the vibration of the 12th chime still hung in the air like the aftermath of a gunshot. My family stood clustered near the front door, a huddled mass of defeat. Kyle was gripping the handle of his briefcase so hard, his knuckles were white, the leather straining against the weight of the useless cash inside. My mother, Patricia, was weeping softly into a tissue, her mascara running in dark rivets down her face, ruining her makeup and her dignity. Bianca just stared at the floor, looking like a child whose favorite toy had been snatched away. They were broken. They were evicted. But I wasn't finished with them yet. Mr. Sterling moved to close the door on them to seal their exile, but I raised my hand. Wait, Arthur, I said, my voice cutting through the sounds of their sniffling. Do not close it yet. I turned to look at them. They looked up, a flicker of pathetic hope igniting in their eyes. They thought I was going to offer them a lifeline. They thought I was going to offer them a guest room or money or maybe just a ride to a hotel. They underestimated me until the very end. You should come back in for a moment, I said, gesturing to the center of the room. Not as owners, but as witnesses. There is one last thing Grandpa Cyrus wanted you to see, one last lesson he wanted to teach you about the difference between price and value. Kyle hesitated, then stepped back onto the hardwood floor, clutching his briefcase like a shield. What is it, Dom? He asked, his voice hoarse. Is it a check? Did he leave us a secret account? I walked over to the piano. I ran my hand along the curve of the lid, feeling the cool smoothness of the mahogany. I looked at the front left leg of the instrument. To the untrained eye, it was just a solid piece of carved wood, holding up the massive weight of the harp and strings. But to Grandpa, it was a vault. I sat down on the piano bench. I reached underneath the seat and felt for the small latch that opened the compartment where sheet music was usually stored. But instead of music, I pulled out a tool. It was a custom-made T-shaped wrench made of solid brass. Grandpa had shown it to me when I was 10 years old, telling me it was for tuning, but he had winked when he said it. My mother stepped closer, wiping her eyes. What are you doing? She sniffled. That is a tuning wrench. No, Mother, I said, kneeling down on the floor next to the piano leg. This is a key. I felt for the small, almost invisible indentation on the underside of the leg's decorative caster. I inserted the wrench. It fit perfectly with a satisfying metallic click. You see, Kyle? I said, looking up at him as I applied pressure to the wrench. You saw an old piano. You saw wood that you could sell for cash to buy a car. You saw a heavy object that took up space. I turned the wrench. There was a sharp crack as the seal broke, but Grandpa saw a sanctuary. I continued. He knew that banks fail. He knew that markets crash. And most of all, he knew that greedy relatives can sniff out a bank account from a mile away, so he decided to hide his real wealth in the one place he knew you would never look, inside the music. I gave the wrench one final hard twist. The entire bottom section of the ornate piano leg unscrewed. It didn't fall off. It slid down, revealing that the thick wooden leg was actually a hollow cylinder lined with felt. Kyle's mouth dropped open. Bianca took a step forward, her phone forgotten in her hand. Inside the hollow leg, resting snugly against the felt lining, was a tube. It wasn't made of cardboard or plastic. It was a heavy waterproof cylinder made of brushed steel sealed with wax. I reached up and pulled the cylinder out. It was heavy, dense with potential. I stood up and placed it on the closed lid of the piano. What is that? Bianca whispered. Is it gold? Better, I said. I picked up a letter opener from the side table and chipped away the wax seal. I unscrewed the cap of the tube. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Everyone was holding their breath. Even Mr. Sterling, who knew the secret, leaned in closer. I tipped the tube. A roll of thick cream-colored paper slid out. It was tied with a faded blue ribbon. The paper looked old, textured, and official. I untied the ribbon and unrolled the stack. There were 50 sheets of paper. They were intricate, printed with green and black ink, featuring engravings of eagles and neoclassical buildings. They looked like money, but much larger and much more important. United States Treasury bearer bonds, I announced, holding one up to the light. Issued in 1955. My mother squinted at them. Bonds, she said, sounding disappointed. Paper, what are they worth? A few thousand. I smiled. I looked at Mr. Sterling. Arthur, would you like to do the math for them? Sterling stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. Certainly, Ms. Vance. These are 30-year Treasury bonds with a face value of $10,000 each. However, they have been maturing for decades. They have been accumulating interest, compounding year over year, protected from inflation. He paused, looking at Kyle. But the most important thing about bearer bonds, Mr. Vance, is in the name. They are not registered to any individual. They are not in a digital database. They belong to the bearer. That means whoever holds this physical piece of paper owns the money. It is as good as cash. Better, actually. Sterling took a breath. At current market rates, considering the accrued interest and the collectible value of the certificates themselves, this stack of paper is valued at approximately $3.2 million. The number hung in the air. 3.2 million. My mother made a sound like a balloon deflating. Her knees simply gave out. She didn't faint gracefully like they do in the movies. She crumbled. She sank to the floor in a heap of black fabric and despair, staring up at the papers in my hand with wide, unseeing eyes. 3 million, she wheezed. I sold $3 million. You sold it for 195,000, I corrected her gently. You sold a diamond mine to buy a shovel. Kyle dropped the briefcase. He didn't mean to. His hands just stopped working. The heavy case hit the floor and the latch popped open again, spilling his bundles of loan shark cash onto the rug. $50,000 of dirty money lay scattered at his feet, looking like Monopoly money compared to the bonds in my hand. No, Kyle whispered, shaking his head. No, that is not possible. We had it. We had the piano. It was right here. You had the shell, Kyle, I said. You looked at the surface. You never bothered to look inside. That is your problem. That has always been your problem. You think wealth is what you wear or what you drive, but real wealth is what you protect. Bianca started to scream. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure materialistic agony. We could have been rich, she wailed, stomping her foot. We could have been famous. I could have had my own reality show. It was right there. It was in our house for years. She turned on her mother. You idiot, she screamed at Patricia. You sold it. You sold my inheritance for a stupid car. Patricia didn't answer. She just rocked back and forth on the floor, mumbling the numbers over and over again. 3.2, 3.2. Kyle looked at me. His eyes were pleading, desperate, terrified. He looked at the bonds, then at the cash on the floor, then back at me. Dom, he stammered, stepping over his wife's sobbing form. Dom, listen, we are family. You can't keep all that. It is too much money for one person. We are in trouble. Bad trouble. I borrowed money, Dom. I borrowed from bad people. I rolled the bonds back up. I slid them back into the steel tube. I screwed the cap on tight. I know you did, Kyle, I said. I heard you on the phone. Marco wasn't it. Kyle turned a sickly shade of green. You know, I know everything I said. I know you put up the G-Wagon as collateral. I know you promised him the house. And I know you promised him $1 million by tomorrow. I walked over to him. I tapped the steel tube against his chest. You have a problem, Kyle. You have a very big, very violent problem. But it is not my problem. I turned to Mr. Sterling. Arthur, please take these bonds and place them in the firm's safe deposit box immediately. I don't want them in the house with these trespassers. Sterling took the tube. Consider it done, Ms. Vance. I looked back at my family. My mother was catatonic. Bianca was hysterical. Kyle was looking at the window as if expecting a sniper. Now I said, my voice hard and final. Get out. Kyle didn't move. He stared at the cash on the floor. I can't, he whispered. If I leave here without the deed, Marco will kill me. Then I suggest you start running, I said. And then, as if on cue, a sound cut through the heavy atmosphere of the room. It started faint, distant, but it grew louder with every second. It was a wailing, rising and falling sound. Sirens. Kyle's head snapped up. He looked at the front door. What did you do? He asked, his voice trembling. I didn't do anything, I said, walking to the window and pulling back the lace curtain. But I believe Mr. Sterling notified the authorities about a few irregularities. The IRS for my mother. And for you, Kyle. Well, I believe the police are quite interested in the fraudulent wire transfer you attempted to send to the broker. Wire fraud is a federal crime, you know. Blue and red lights began to flash against the living room walls, illuminating the orange spray paint scar in a chaotic strobe effect. "They are here," I said. The front door did not just open. It burst open. The hallway was instantly flooded with a sea of uniforms. There were 4 uniformed officers from the Oak Park Police Department, their hands resting on their holsters, but behind them walked the real threat. 2 men and a woman in cheap, ill-fitting gray suits. They did not look like cops. They looked like accountants who carried badges. They were the federal agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Kyle took a step back, tripping over the piles of cash he had spilled on the floor. He tried to regain his composure, puffing out his chest in a last-ditch attempt to play the role of the important businessman. "What is the meaning of this?" Kyle stammered, his voice cracking. "This is a private residence. You cannot just barge in here. I know my rights." One of the uniformed officers stepped forward. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metal caught the light of the chandelier. Kyle Vance, the officer, said, his voice flat and bored. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and the attempted laundering of monetary instruments. We have a flagged transaction of $1 million from a known criminal enterprise account that hit your personal ledger 30 minutes ago." Kyle's face went from pale to ghost white. "But I didn't do it," he squealed. "I mean, I sent it, but I didn't spend it. It was a loan." "You can explain that to the federal prosecutor," the officer said. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Kyle didn't turn. He looked at me. He looked at my mother. He looked for anyone to save him. But when the officer grabbed his arm and spun him around, the fight left his body. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and final. Click, click, click. My mother Patricia let out a wail of despair. "Oh Lord, not my Kyle. He is a good boy. This is a mistake. Officers, please, he is a father." She reached out to grab the officer's arm, but the woman in the gray suit stepped in front of her. She held up a hand. It wasn't a gesture of comfort, it was a stop sign. "Patricia Vance?" the agent asked. "Yes," my mother sobbed. "I am the victim here. My daughter is trying to steal my house." The agent didn't blink. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope with a red stripe across the top. "I am Agent Miller with the Internal Revenue Service. I am serving you with a federal subpoena regarding 5 years of unreported income tax evasion and a specific count of financial elder abuse regarding the unauthorized liquidation of assets belonging to Cyrus Vance." My mother stopped crying instantly. "Elder abuse," she whispered. "We tracked the sale of the Steinway piano." Agent Miller continued, her voice like a jagged rock. "You sold it under false pretenses and failed to report the capital gains. Furthermore, since you used a medical power of attorney to defraud a dying man, the state is freezing all assets associated with your name pending a forensic audit. That includes your personal bank accounts, your pension, and your jewelry." My mother looked down at the diamond brooch on her dress. She covered it with her hand, trembling. "You are ruining me," she gasped. "I am a pillar of this community. The church. What will the church think? They will think you are a thief, Patricia," I said from across the room. The officers began to escort them out. It was a parade of shame. Kyle was shoved forward, his head hung low, weeping openly now. My mother was flanked by the IRS agents, clutching her subpoena like it was a death warrant. Bianca followed them, screaming at the police not to touch her arm because she bruised easily. I followed them out onto the porch. The front lawn was a circus. The neighbors were all out on their driveways, phones out, recording everything. The flashing lights of the police cruisers painted the whole street in a chaotic blue and red. But the centerpiece of the disaster was the tow truck. It was a massive flatbed truck with the logo of the leasing bank on the side. The driver had already hooked up the chains to the front axle of the black Mercedes G-Wagon. As the winch began to whine, the front wheels of the luxury SUV lifted off the ground. Bianca saw it and let out a scream that shattered the night air. No, she shrieked, trying to run past the police line. Not the car. I have a brand deal. I need that car for content. You can't take it. It is my brand. The tow truck driver didn't care about her brand. He didn't care about her Instagram following. He just pulled the lever. The G-Wagon. The symbol of their greed, the object they had sold a $3 million legacy to buy, was dragged unceremoniously up the ramp of the flatbed. It looked ridiculous, tilted at a 45-degree angle, its alarm blaring in protest. I stood on the porch, leaning against the railing. I watched as the police car doors slammed shut, trapping Kyle and my mother in the back seat. I watched as the tow truck driver secured the chains. They had wanted to be the talk of the town. They had wanted everyone to look at them. Well, I thought watching the neighbors zoom in with their cameras. Now they are looking. I turned around and walked back into the quiet house. I closed the heavy oak door, shutting out the sirens, the screaming, and the flashing lights. It was finally over. The flashing blue lights of the police cruiser faded into the distance, taking Kyle and his delusions of grandeur to the county jail. The silence that rushed back into the living room was heavy and suffocating. It was just the three of us now. Me, the owner of the estate, Patricia, the mother who had betrayed me, and Bianca, the sister who had mocked me. They stood in the center of the room, looking small and terrified. The arrogance that had fueled them for years had evaporated the moment the handcuffs clicked onto Kyle's wrists. My mother looked at the empty doorway, then at me. Her face crumpled. She didn't just cry, she collapsed. She fell to her knees on the hardwood floor, her expensive black dress bunching up around her legs, her hands clasped together in a posture of desperate prayer. Dominique, she wailed, her voice cracking with hysteria. Baby, please, you have to stop this. You have to call the lawyer. You have to fix this. We are your family. I gave birth to you. I carried you for 9 months. Does that mean nothing to you? Bianca dropped to her knees beside her, grabbing the hem of my skirt. She wasn't worried about Kyle. She was worried about herself. Dom, please, she sobbed, mascara running down her cheeks. You can't kick us out. I have nowhere to go. My friends will see the mugshot. My life is over. We are sisters. We have the same blood. Doesn't blood matter more than money? I looked down at them. I looked at the women who had made me feel like a stranger in my own home for 30 years. I looked at the women who had forced me to drive a dirty car to a hospice center while they drove a tank bought with stolen money. I took a step back, pulling my skirt from Bianca's grip. Blood, I repeated softly. You want to talk about blood? I walked over to the side table where my purse was sitting. I unzipped the side pocket. You didn't care about blood when you sold Grandpa's piano while he was dying, I said, my voice rising. You didn't care about blood when you tried to erase his house from the earth to build condos. You didn't care about blood when you slapped me across the face yesterday in this very room. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was crisp white and terrifyingly official. My mother looked up, wiping her nose. What is that? She whispered. I walked back to them. I held the paper out. Mr. Sterling prepared this for me, I said. He calls it the Clean Break Protocol. It is a legal document. It states that you, Patricia Vance, and you, Bianca Vance, voluntarily relinquish all claims to the Vance estate, past, present, and future. It also states that you agree to a permanent restraining order. You will never contact me again. You will never come within 500 feet of this property. And you will never use the Vance name to solicit money or sympathy ever again. My mother gasped. You want to disown us? Legally. I want to formalize what you already did to me years ago, I said coldly. I looked at the door. Here is the deal, I continued. You are currently trespassing. I can call the police back right now. I can have you arrested to join Kyle. Trespassing combined with the IRS investigation will ensure you spend the next few years in a federal cell. Bianca let out a strangled cry. No, I can't go to jail. I can't. Then sign the paper, I ordered. I threw the paper and a pen onto the floor in front of them. Sign it and I won't press charges for trespassing. Sign it and you walk out of here free. Well, as free as you can be with the IRS breathing down your neck. My mother looked at the paper. She looked at me. She saw the stone wall in my eyes. She realized finally that her manipulation tactics no longer worked. Her tears meant nothing. Her guilt trips were empty. With a trembling hand, she picked up the pen. She signed her name. The signature was shaky, broken, just like her future. She passed the pen to Bianca. Bianca signed it quickly, desperate to escape. I picked up the paper. I checked the signatures. I folded it and put it in my pocket. Good, I said. Now get up. They stood up slowly, clutching their purses. My clothes? My mother stammered. My jewelry. My things are upstairs. Can we at least pack a bag? I smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. You don't need to go upstairs, Mother. I already packed for you. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. I pointed to the front lawn. There, sitting in the grass near the driveway, were 4 Louis Vuitton suitcases. I had thrown them off the balcony an hour ago, right before the police arrived. They were lying on their sides, looking discarded and pathetic against the manicured green grass. I packed everything I thought you deserved, I said, which is mostly the clothes you bought with my grandfather's money. Consider it a parting gift. My mother looked at the bags, then at the long, empty driveway. The G-Wagon was gone. The tow truck had taken it. But how will we leave? She whispered. We don't have a car. You took the Honda keys back. We can't carry those bags. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I seem to recall a conversation we had yesterday, I said. You told me that walking was good exercise. You told me that I should be grateful for whatever transportation I could get. I looked at her expensive Christian Louboutin heels. I looked at Bianca's designer boots. You have legs, Mother, I said. And you have the Lord. You always say the Lord provides. So start walking. I am sure God will bless your feet. But it is 3 miles to the train station, Bianca cried. Then you better get moving, I said. It looks like it might rain. I stepped back and grabbed the heavy iron handle of the front door. Goodbye, Patricia. Goodbye, Bianca. Do not write, do not call, and do not come back. I didn't wait for their response. I slammed the door shut. The sound echoed through the house like a thunderclap. I locked the deadbolt. Click, then the chain. Slide. I walked to the window and watched through the lace curtains. I saw them standing on the porch for a moment, stunned. Then slowly they walked down the steps. They dragged their heavy suitcases across the gravel driveway, their heels scraping and stumbling. They looked like refugees of their own making. They reached the front gate. My mother looked back one last time. She looked at the house she had lost. She looked at the window where I was standing. I didn't wave. I just let the curtain fall back into place. I pressed the button on the wall that controlled the electronic gate. Outside, the heavy iron gates began to swing shut. They squealed on their hinges, a sound of finality. My mother and sister had to scramble to squeeze through the gap before the gates locked. Clang. The gates shut. The lock engaged. They were on the outside. I was on the inside. I turned around and looked at my living room. The orange spray paint was still on the wall, but I didn't mind. I would paint over it. I would paint the whole house. I would fill it with new art, new music, and new memories. I walked over to the Steinway. I sat down on the bench. I placed my hands on the keys. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lemon oil and victory. And then I began to play. I played Moonlight Sonata, just like Grandpa asked. The music filled the empty house, chasing away the ghosts, chasing away the pain. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of freedom. And for the first time in my life, it was the sound of absolute beautiful silence. The seasons changed quickly in Chicago. The humid heat of that chaotic summer gave way to a crisp, golden autumn. 6 months had passed since the flashing lights of the police cruisers faded from Greenwood Avenue, and the silence that settled over the estate was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. I stood in the center of the living room watching a team of restoration experts carefully apply a fresh coat of cream-colored paint over the wall where the neon orange spray paint used to be. The scar was gone. The jagged line that Kyle had drawn to mark the demolition was buried under layers of primer and care. The house was breathing again, its lungs filling with the scent of fresh plaster and lemon oil instead of greed and desperation. But while my walls were being rebuilt, the lives of my family were being dismantled brick by brick. I did not hunt them down. I did not harass them. I simply let the universe balance the scales. Mr. Sterling kept me updated during our monthly meetings, his voice devoid of pity as he read the reports. My mother, Patricia, learned the hard way that her social standing was built on a foundation of sand. The Sunday after the raid, she tried to return to the Ebenezer Baptist Church, wearing her best hat, expecting sympathy. She didn't get it. Mrs. Gable, the head of the choir, placed her purse on the front pew to block my mother from sitting there. The community that Patricia had preened for had turned its back on her. It turns out that elder abuse and tax fraud are sins that even the church mothers cannot gossip away. To pay the IRS and avoid a prison sentence of her own, my mother had to liquidate everything. She sold her condo. She sold her jewelry. She lives in a studio apartment 3 towns over now. I saw her once from a distance at a discount grocery store. She was arguing with a cashier over a 50-cent coupon. She looked older. She looked small. She didn't see me, or maybe she just couldn't bear to look at the woman who had finally stopped enabling her. And then there is Bianca. The girl who thought manual labor was for peasants is currently getting a crash course in reality. With the G-Wagon impounded and Kyle serving a 3-year sentence for wire fraud at a federal correctional facility in Indiana, the influencer lifestyle came to a screeching halt. The bank accounts were frozen. The credit cards were declined. She had to get a job, a real one. Last week I drove past a diner on the outskirts of the city. I stopped at the red light and looked through the window. There she was. Bianca was wearing a polyester uniform that was 2 sizes too big, pouring coffee for a truck driver. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, stripped of its expensive extensions. She dropped a fork, and I watched her bend down to pick it up, wiping a smear of ketchup off the floor with a rag. It was a cruel, poetic mirror of the moment she mocked me for heating up quiches at the party. She was finally working for a living, serving others, instead of serving herself. I didn't go in. I didn't order a coffee to gloat. I just waited for the light to turn green and drove away. Their punishment wasn't my responsibility anymore. It was simply the natural consequence of gravity. They tried to fly too close to the sun on wings made of stolen cash, and now they were hitting the ground. Hard. I turned my car back toward Oak Park, toward the home that was finally truly mine. The air in the living room was warm, smelling of cinnamon roasted rosemary and genuine laughter. It was the night of my housewarming party, a gathering that marked the official rebirth of the Vance estate. For the first time in decades, the house was filled with people who were not looking for a handout or a photo opportunity. My colleagues from the auction house in New York had flown in for the weekend. My assistant David was in the corner excitedly talking about art history with Mr. Sterling. Even the old neighbors, the ones who had been alienated by my mother's snobbery, had returned, bringing homemade pies and warm wishes. I wore a simple silk dress, moving through the crowd with a lightness I had never felt before. There was no need to hide, no need to make myself small, and no need to apologize for my existence. This was my home. These were my people. And the ghosts of the past had finally been evicted. As the chatter softened into a comfortable hum, Mr. Sterling tapped his glass with a spoon. The room went quiet, turning their attention to the center of the room. "Play for us," Dominique Sterling said, raising his glass. "Give this house its voice back." I smiled and walked over to the Steinway. The mahogany gleamed under the soft amber light of the chandelier. I sat down on the bench, the same bench where I had sat as a terrified little girl, the same bench where I had sat as a grieving granddaughter, and the same bench where I had sat as a ruthless executor of justice. I placed my fingers on the keys. They felt cool and familiar. I didn't play a sad song. I didn't play a funeral dirge. I played a jazz standard, one of Grandpa Cyrus's favorites. It was a song about resilience, about taking the broken pieces of a melody and improvising something beautiful. As the music filled the room, weaving through the conversations and the laughter, I closed my eyes. I thought about Kyle sitting in a cold cell in Indiana, finally paying the price for a life of shortcuts. I thought about Bianca wiping tables at a diner, learning the value of $1 the hard way. I thought about my mother alone in her small apartment, surrounded by the silence she had created. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was fleeting. It was the ghost of an obligation I no longer carried. For years I had believed that I had to endure their abuse because we shared a last name. I thought loyalty meant setting myself on fire to keep them warm. But as the notes resonated from the hollow legs of the piano legs that no longer held millions of dollars, but still held a million memories, I realized the truth. I looked out at the faces of my friends, my colleagues, and the people who had stood by me when I had nothing. I looked at Mr. Sterling, who had fought for me like a father. Grandpa was right. The treasure wasn't the money. The treasure was the freedom to choose who gets to sit at your table. As I played the final lingering chord, letting the harmony resolve into a perfect, peaceful silence, I looked directly into the camera of my mind, speaking to every person who has ever felt small in their own family. Family is not DNA. Family is not a name on a birth certificate or a face in a photo album. Family is respect. Family is the people who celebrate your victories without jealousy and hold your hand through the storms without judgment. And sometimes, to find true peace, you have to be brave enough to pick up the pruning shears. You have to accept that you must cut off the rotten branches, even if they grew from the same root. It is not an act of hate. It is an act of survival. The final note faded away. The room erupted in applause, warm and thunderous. I looked down at the keys one last time. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered. I smiled a genuine, unburdened smile. I reached out and gently lowered the heavy mahogany lid over the keys. Click. The chapter was closed. The music was mine, and the future was waiting. This story is a powerful reminder that family is defined by behavior, not biology. Dominique taught us that toxicity often disguises itself as obligation, forcing us to tolerate abuse just because we share a last name. But true self-worth begins the moment you stop handing the keys to your happiness to people who only want to crash your car. You cannot save those who are addicted to their own destruction, and you should never set yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. Real wealth isn't the luxury you display, it is the peace you protect. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic branch to save your own tree, hit that like button and subscribe. Share your story in the comments below, because while we cannot choose where we come from, we can always choose where we are going.